The plane was falling from the sky, engines dead, oxygen masks dangling like broken promises, and the only person who could save 300 lives was the man Evelyn Cross had spent the last hour silently judging as unworthy of sitting beside her. Before we begin this story of survival, redemption, and unexpected grace, I invite you to stay with me until the very end. If this story moves you, please hit that like button and comment with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Evelyn Cross didn't believe in fate, divine intervention, or second chances. She believed in algorithms, quarterly projections, and the brutal efficiency of natural selection in business. At 42, she had built Crosstech Industries from a garage startup into a $7 billion empire that redefined cloud infrastructure across 3 continents. She had sacrificed relationships, sleep, health, and softness to reach the summit, and she had no regrets. Which was why, seated in 2A of the business class cabin on Flight 1, 847 from Seattle to Boston, she found the presence of the man in 2B so personally offensive. Ryan Hale didn't belong here. That was Evelyn's first thought when he'd settled into the seat beside her 3 hours ago, his worn canvas jacket brushing against her Armani sleeve, his scuffed work boots a jarring contrast to her Italian leather heels. He carried the smell of honest labor, engine oil, industrial soap, something faintly metallic that spoke of hands that actually touched things, built things, fixed things. He was perhaps 35, maybe 40, with dark hair showing premature silver at the temples, and lines around his eyes that suggested either laughter or pain. Evelyn couldn't tell which and didn't particularly care. His hands, resting quietly on the armrest between them, were scarred and calloused, the nails clean but permanently stained. A working man's hands. Those hands bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Evelyn had grown up poor, genuinely poor, not the performative poverty that entrepreneurs claimed in their origin stories. She knew what it meant to have nothing, to be invisible, to be dismissed by people who measured human worth in net worth. She had clawed her way out of that world through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an absolute refusal to apologize for her ambition. And somewhere along that climb, she had become exactly the kind of person who once would have looked through her like glass. The irony wasn't lost on her. She simply chose not to care. Ryan hadn't spoken since boarding, hadn't tried to make small talk or introduce himself. He'd simply nodded politely when taking his seat, stowed a small, carefully packed duffel bag in the overhead compartment, and opened a worn paperback, something by Cormac McCarthy, she'd noticed with surprise. Then he'd settled into his seat with a stillness that was almost unnatural in the age of constant distraction. No laptop, no tablet, no phone scrolling. Just the book, and occasionally his gaze drifting to the window where clouds stretched endlessly below them. Evelyn had spent the first hour of the flight working on her laptop, preparing for the board meeting in Boston where she would present her acquisition strategy for a promising AI startup. The numbers were flawless. The strategy was aggressive, but defensible. She would walk into that boardroom and dominate, as she always did. But her concentration kept fragmenting, drawn back to the quiet presence beside her. It wasn't attraction. Evelyn had learned long ago to compartmentalize such inconveniences. It was something else. Irritation, perhaps, at his very existence in a space she had mentally designated as belonging to people like her. People who had earned their place through achievement and excellence. How had he even afforded a business class seat? Had he saved for months, used credit card points, won some kind of contest? The questions bothered her because they revealed something she didn't like about herself. The assumption that this man with his working hands and weathered boots couldn't possibly belong in the same rarefied air she breathed. She had become her enemy, and she knew it. And still, she judged. The flight attendant appeared with the lunch service, her practiced smile bright and automatic. "What can I get you today?" "Just coffee," Evelyn said without looking up from her screen. "Black." Of course, Ms. Cross. The attendant knew her name, probably from the passenger manifest, possibly from recognition. Evelyn Cross wasn't famous exactly, but she was known in certain circles. "And for you, sir?" Ryan looked up from his book, and Evelyn caught something in his expression, a kind of weathered courtesy, the politeness of someone who had been taught manners not as performance, but as principle. "Whatever's easiest," he said quietly. I'm not picky. The braised short ribs are excellent today. That sounds perfect. Thank you. Such a small exchange, utterly unremarkable. But something in his voice, the measured tone, the lack of neediness or assertion, made Evelyn glance at him more carefully. He had returned to his book, but she noticed details she'd missed before. The way he sat, posture perfect but not rigid, taking up exactly his allotted space and no more. The controlled precision of his movements when he turned a page. The scars, thin white lines barely visible on his forearms where his sleeves had ridden up slightly. Not construction scars. Something else. The coffee arrived bitter and black, exactly as she liked it. Ryan's lunch came on its ridiculous business class tray, and he ate methodically, not with the enthusiasm of someone experiencing a rare luxury, but with the efficiency of someone for whom food was simply fuel. Evelyn found herself watching him when she thought he wouldn't notice. Long flight, she said suddenly, surprising herself. She never made small talk with strangers. Ryan looked at her, his eyes an unexpected gray-blue, clear and direct. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am. When was the last time anyone had called her that? Business or pleasure? The question was automatic, meaningless. Family, he said simply. Then after a pause, my daughter, she's 7, lives with her mother in Boston. I'm in Seattle for work, so I fly out every few weeks. Something shifted in Evelyn's chest, a sensation she didn't immediately recognize because it had been so long since she'd felt it. Empathy, perhaps, or shame. A father flying cross-country every few weeks to see his child. Those business-class tickets, saved for, scrimped for, prioritized not for comfort, but for time. 6 hours instead of 8, with layovers. Every minute counted when you were measuring your child's life in weekend visits. That must be hard, she said, and meant it. Ryan's smile was brief and didn't reach his eyes. Worth it, though. She's everything. He didn't elaborate, and Evelyn didn't push. She returned to her laptop, but the numbers on the screen had lost their clarity. Instead, she kept thinking about a 7-year-old girl waiting in Boston, counting the hours until her father's plane landed. What did Evelyn have waiting for her? A hotel room, a boardroom, the same elegant isolation that had been her companion for years. She pushed the thought away and focused on her acquisition models. The turbulence started small, just minor bumps, the kind that made coffee ripple in cups and nervous flyers grip their armrests. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and unconcerned. Folks, we're encountering some light chop as we pass through a weather system over the Rockies. Nothing to worry about, but we're going to ask everyone to return to their seats and fasten their seatbelts. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin. Evelyn closed her laptop and fastened her belt. Beside her, Ryan carefully marked his place in his book and set it aside. She noticed he didn't tighten his seatbelt, didn't grip the armrests, didn't show any of the subtle tells of anxiety. The turbulence intensified. The plane dropped suddenly, just a few feet, but enough to make people gasp, enough to send a flight attendant stumbling as she rushed to her jump seat. And that's when Evelyn noticed something strange. Ryan wasn't looking at the seat back in front of him, or out the window, or at his hands. He was listening. His head was slightly cocked, his eyes focused on nothing, his entire body absolutely still in a way that reminded her of a predator freezing before the strike. He was listening to the plane. Another drop, harder this time. Bags rattled in the overhead compartments. Someone in economy let out a small scream. The mountain peaks were visible below now, jagged and snow-covered, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has turned on the fasten seatbelt sign. Please remain seated with your seatbelts securely fastened. The attendant's voice was professional, but Evelyn could hear the tension underneath. The plane shuddered, a deep vibration that felt wrong, felt fundamental. And then, the sound. It wasn't dramatic like in movies. It was subtle, almost innocent. A slight change in the engine noise, a diminishment so gradual that most passengers probably didn't even register it. But Ryan's head snapped up, and Evelyn saw something flash across his face. Not fear, but recognition and calculation. That's not normal, she said quietly, surprising herself again. Ryan looked at her, and in his eyes she saw confirmation. And something else. Experience. Knowledge. The kind of understanding that came from intimate familiarity with how aircraft sounded when everything worked, and how they sounded when something went catastrophically wrong. "No," he said simply. "It's not." The plane tilted, just slightly, the pilot compensating for something. The engine noise changed again, and this time even Evelyn heard it. A roughness that didn't belong, a hesitation in the steady roar. Passengers were starting to notice now. Conversations died. People sat straighter, hands gripping armrests, eyes darting to windows and flight attendants and each other, looking for reassurance that everything was fine. Ryan's breathing had changed. Not faster, slower, deeper, controlled. The kind of breathing you learned when you needed to stay calm in situations where panic meant death. Evelyn's heart was racing, but her mind stayed clear. She had built her empire by staying focused when others panicked, by seeing patterns when others saw chaos. And the pattern here was clear. Something was very wrong, and the quiet man beside her knew exactly how wrong it was. "You know about planes," she said. Not a question. Ryan didn't answer immediately. His eyes were closed now, his breathing measured, his hands absolutely still on the armrests, listening, feeling, reading the aircraft through vibrations and sounds most people couldn't distinguish from normal flight. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the increasingly rough engine noise. "I know about planes." The captain's voice came back on, and this time the smooth confidence was gone, replaced by something tight and controlled. "Flight attendants, prepare for emergency procedures." The cabin erupted in gasps and scattered screams. Oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments with a collective thump that sounded like a death knell. The flight attendants moved with practiced urgency, their training overriding their fear, but Evelyn could see it in their eyes. This was real. This was happening. This was the nightmare scenario they drilled for but never expected to face. "Place the mask over your nose and mouth, pull the strap to tighten, breathe normally." The instructions were automatic, delivered in voices that shook despite their training. All around them, passengers fumbled with masks, pulled children close, reached for phones to send what might be final messages. Evelyn's hands moved automatically, securing her mask, but her eyes stayed on Ryan. He had put his mask on with mechanical efficiency, but his attention was elsewhere, on the sounds, the vibrations, the subtle cues that told a story only he could read. The second engine failed with a sound like a cough, like a giant choking, and then silence. Not complete silence. There was still the rushing of air over the fuselage, still the creaking of metal and plastic under stress, still the sounds of 300 people breathing through masks and praying in a dozen different languages. But the engines, the massive turbines that had been screaming their power since takeoff, were quiet, and the plane was falling. Not like a stone, not straight down. Commercial aircraft didn't fall that way. Their wings still generated lift even without power. But they were descending, gliding, the mountain peaks below growing larger with each passing second. "Oh God," someone whispered behind them. "Oh God, oh God, oh God." Evelyn had spent her entire adult life in control. She controlled her company, her emotions, her image, her destiny. She had never allowed herself to be at the mercy of circumstances, had never accepted powerlessness as an option. But here, strapped in a metal tube falling from the sky, she had no control at all. And for the first time in 20 years, Evelyn Cross felt real fear. She turned to Ryan, not knowing what she hoped to find, and saw something impossible. He was calm, not the fake calm of denial or shock, but genuine composure. His breathing was measured, his eyes clear behind the oxygen mask, his entire bearing radiating a kind of quiet competence that seemed utterly incongruous with the chaos around them. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Evelyn saw past the oil-stained hands and worn boots to something she had completely missed. This man wasn't out of place in business class because he didn't belong at altitude. He was out of place because he belonged in the cockpit. The intercom crackled to life, and a voice, young, male, absolutely terrified, cut through the cabin. "This is First Officer Matthews. Captain Hughes is... The captain is unconscious. We've lost both engines. I'm..." A pause, a breath that carried the weight of 300 lives. "I'm doing everything I can, but I've never landed a plane without power. Is there anyone on board with flight experience? Anyone at all?" Silence. terrible, complete silence except for the whistle of air and the creaking of metal. Evelyn turned to Ryan, her heart hammering, her mind racing with an impossible question. And Ryan Hale, the quiet man with calloused hands who had spent the flight reading McCarthy and thinking about his 7-year-old daughter, slowly, so slowly, stood up. The cabin's attention swiveled to him like a single organism. 300 faces, 300 pairs of desperate eyes, all fixing on the man in the worn jacket and scuffed boots standing in the business class aisle with oxygen mask dangling from his hand. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but carried perfectly in the terrible silence. I can fly. 3 words. Simple. Devastating. Impossible. The flight attendant nearest to him, a young woman whose name tag read Sarah, stared at him with an expression caught between hope and disbelief. You're a pilot? Ryan's jaw tightened, and Evelyn saw something flash across his face. Pain, old and deep, like a wound that had never properly healed. I was, he said. I can get us down. Sarah didn't hesitate. Come with me. But Ryan didn't move immediately. He turned to his seat, reached into the pocket of his jacket, and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly, typing a message Evelyn couldn't see. But she knew what he was writing. A message to a 7-year-old girl, just in case. Then he handed the phone to Evelyn. Their eyes met again, and in his gaze she saw a depth of sorrow and determination that made her chest ache. If we don't make it, he said quietly, please make sure this gets sent. Her name is Emma Hale. Her mother is Jessica Hale in Boston. She should hear it from me. Evelyn took the phone with shaking hands. We're going to make it. Ryan's smile was sad and knowing. Maybe, but I stopped believing in guaranteed outcomes a long time ago. Then he turned and followed Sarah toward the cockpit, walking with perfect balance despite the plane's unsteady glide, his shoulders squared, his stride purposeful. Evelyn watched him go. This man she had dismissed as unworthy of sharing her air, the stranger who was now walking toward the cockpit to attempt the impossible, to land a dead aircraft in the Rocky Mountains and save 300 lives, including his own. Her hands were still shaking as she looked down at the phone she held. The message was there, unsent, waiting. Emma, baby, I love you more than all the stars in all the skies. Be brave. Be kind. Remember that Daddy always loved you most. You are my everything. Evelyn Cross, who hadn't cried in 15 years, who had trained herself to feel nothing that might interfere with business, who had sacrificed every soft part of herself on the altar of success, felt tears streaming down her face behind her oxygen mask. And somewhere between the dropping oxygen levels and the approaching mountain peaks, between the message on a stranger's phone and the impossible courage of a father walking toward certain death or miracle, Evelyn understood something fundamental. She had spent 20 years climbing to the top of the world, and she had learned absolutely nothing about what actually mattered. The plane shuddered, dropping another 100 feet, and through her window Evelyn could see the mountains in terrible detail now. Granite faces, snowfields, pine forests that looked like carpet from this height, but would be as hard as concrete when they hit. If they hit. In the cockpit, Ryan Hale was sliding into the captain's seat beside a first officer barely out of flight school, looking at controls he hadn't touched in 7 years, preparing to attempt a landing that even with engines would be nearly impossible. And in seat 2A, Evelyn Cross held a phone containing a father's final words to his daughter, and prayed to a God she didn't believe in that those words would remain unsent, that somehow, impossibly, the man she had judged as beneath her would prove to be exactly what they needed, that the hands she had dismissed as common would be the hands that saved them all. The plane dropped again, and the mountains rose to meet them, and somewhere in the cockpit, a man who had walked away from the sky 7 years ago was about to discover whether redemption was possible at terminal velocity. The cockpit door had never seemed so far away. Ryan moved through the tilted cabin with the muscle memory of someone who had spent years navigating aircraft in crisis, his body automatically adjusting to the changing angle as the plane continued its controlled descent toward the mountains below. Behind him, he could feel 300 pairs of eyes boring into his back, 300 silent prayers hanging on his shoulders like physical weight. Sarah, the flight attendant, had to use the seat backs to pull herself forward as the descent angle increased. "How long since you've flown?" she asked, her voice tight with fear she was trying desperately to control. 7 years, Ryan said quietly. "Give or take." He heard her sharp intake of breath but didn't turn around. There was no point in explaining, no time for the whole truth, that he had been one of the best combat pilots in his squadron, that he had logged over 3,000 hours in conditions that would terrify commercial pilots, that he had brought damaged aircraft home from missions when everyone else said it was impossible, and that he had walked away from all of it because the last time he flew, someone died. The cockpit door was open, protocol abandoned in the emergency. Ryan stepped through and immediately assessed the situation with the clinical detachment that had kept him alive through 2 tours. The captain, Hughes, according to the nameplate, was slumped in his seat, unconscious, a thin line of blood trailing from his temple where he'd struck something when the first engine failed. The first officer, Matthews, was perhaps 26, his hands white-knuckled on the controls, his face slick with sweat. "Thank God," Matthews breathed when he saw Ryan. "Thank God, I don't know what to do. The checklist says—" "Checklist doesn't matter anymore," Ryan said, his voice calm and absolutely certain. "We're past that. I need you to focus and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" Matthews nodded frantically, his eyes wide with terror and desperate hope. "Good. First, help me move the captain." Ryan was already unbuckling Hughes, checking his pulse, steady, strong enough, and carefully maneuvering the unconscious man out of the seat. Sarah appeared beside him, helping to ease Hughes into the jump seat behind the cockpit. She worked quickly, efficiently, strapping him in and checking his airway with the competence of someone whose training had finally found its purpose. Ryan slid into the captain's seat, and the moment his hands touched the controls, something shifted inside him. 7 years fell away like shed skin. His fingers found the yoke, the throttle quadrant, the rudder pedals, and his body remembered what his mind had tried so hard to forget. This was what he was built for. The instrument panel told him everything he needed to know, and none of it was good. Both engines were completely dead, the restart attempts had failed, and they were descending at roughly 1,800 feet per minute. The altimeter showed 22,000 feet. The mountains below peaked at over 14,000. Simple math. Maybe 7 minutes until they either found somewhere to land or became a statistic. "What happened to the captain?" Ryan asked, his hands already moving across the controls, adjusting trim, testing the aircraft's response. "Turbulence," Matthews said. "Hit his head on the panel when we dropped. Then the engine started failing, and I thought I could handle it, but I've only got 200 hours. I've never—" "You've done fine," Ryan interrupted, and meant it. The kid had kept the plane relatively stable, hadn't panicked, hadn't put them into a spin or stall. "What's our fuel situation?" "Showing empty in both tanks, but that can't be right. We should have had plenty." Ryan's jaw tightened. Not engine failure, then. Fuel contamination, possibly, or a leak. Either way, the result was the same. They were a glider now, and gliders needed somewhere to land. "Radio?" he asked. "Denver Center is tracking us. They've cleared all airspace, suggesting we try for Eagle County." Ryan pulled up the navigation display and felt his stomach drop. Eagle County was 40 miles northeast, over terrain that was nothing but peaks and valleys. They'd never make it. "We need something closer," he said, scanning the terrain display. His mind was already calculating glide ratios, wind factors, the aircraft's weight and configuration. A 767 had a glide ratio of about 12 to 1 under optimal conditions. They were at 22,000 feet, so theoretically they could cover maybe 40 miles. But theory and reality diverged sharply when you were threading through mountain ranges with no margin for error. "There," Matthews said, pointing at the display. "Copper Ridge. It's a small regional airport, mostly private planes, but it's got a 3,500-foot runway, 12 miles southwest." Ryan studied the approach. Copper Ridge sat in a valley, surrounded on 3 sides by peaks. The approach path was narrow, technical, requiring precision that would be challenging even with full power. Without engines, it was borderline suicidal. It was also their only chance. "Get me Denver Center," Ryan said. Matthews handed him the headset, and Ryan keyed the mic. His voice, when he spoke, carried the calm authority of someone who had talked to air traffic control while being shot at. "Denver Center, This is Flight 1847. Be advised we have a qualified pilot at the controls. Former military, 3,000 hours. Current situation assessed. Requesting priority vectors for Copper Ridge Regional. The controller's voice came back immediately, professional but unable to completely mask his relief. Flight 1847, Denver Center, copy qualified pilot on board. Copper Ridge is at your 2 o'clock, 12 miles. Winds are 270 at 15, gusting to 22. Runway 26 available, but advise the approach is challenging, I know. Ryan was already adjusting their heading, feeling how the aircraft responded. Heavy, sluggish without engine power to the hydraulics, but still controllable. I'll take challenging over guaranteed impact. Copy that. 1847. Emergency services are being notified. The field is being cleared. You're cleared for any approach, any runway. Roger. 1847 out. Ryan handed the headset back to Matthews and began the systematic process of configuring the aircraft for landing. Landing gear would have to wait. It created too much drag, would kill their glide ratio. Flaps the same. He'd have to bring them in fast and hot, then deploy everything at the last possible second and hope the runway was long enough, 3,500 feet. They'd need at least 4,000 to be safe, given their weight and speed. He didn't mention this to Matthews. I need you to make an announcement to the passengers, Ryan said. Keep it simple. Tell them we have the situation under control. We're attempting a landing at a nearby airport, and they need to prepare for emergency procedures. Brace position, remove sharp objects, all of it. Matthews reached for the cabin intercom, but his hand was shaking so badly he could barely press the button. Ryan caught his wrist, gently but firmly. Look at me, he said. The young first officer met his eyes, and Ryan saw his own terror reflected back at him from 7 years ago. The fear of being responsible for lives, of making the decision that meant survival or death, of carrying that weight forever, regardless of the outcome. You're going to be fine, Ryan said quietly. We're all going to be fine. But I need you present, focused, and functional. Can you do that for me? Matthews took a shuddering breath, then nodded. Yes, sir. Good. Make the announcement. Then I need you on the landing checklist. We won't have time for all of it, but we'll do what we can. Matthews's voice over the cabin intercom was steadier than Ryan expected, carrying the script with enough conviction that passengers might actually believe everything was under control. Ryan tuned it out, focusing on the instruments, the terrain, the impossible geometry of threading a 767 through mountain valleys to a runway that was barely adequate in ideal conditions. Through the cockpit windows, the Rockies spread out in terrible majesty, snow-covered peaks gleaming in the afternoon sun, valleys dark with pine forests, granite faces that would shred the aircraft like aluminum foil if his calculations were off by even a few degrees. Ryan's hands moved across the controls with the precision of a surgeon, making micro-adjustments to their descent path. Too steep and they'd build up too much speed, too shallow, and they wouldn't reach the runway. The margin for error was measured in seconds and degrees. Behind him, Sarah had returned to the cabin, her voice carrying through the open cockpit door as she helped passengers prepare. Ryan caught fragments of her instructions. Head down, hands over your head. Remove glasses and sharp objects. Count to 10 when we tell you, and felt the weight of responsibility settle deeper into his bones. His phone was still with Evelyn, the message to Emma still unsent. He thought about his daughter, probably in school right now, learning multiplication or reading about explorers, completely unaware that her father was attempting to defy physics and fate 12,000 feet above Colorado. If this went wrong, when this went wrong, his mind corrected, because he had stopped believing in miracles 7 years ago, she would grow up with only vague memories of weekend visits and his voice on the phone. She would know him through stories her mother told, through photographs that would yellow with time, through the absence that would shape her in ways he would never see. Approaching 10 miles, Matthews said, his voice tight but controlled. Altitude 12,000 feet, descent rate holding at 1,600. Copy, Ryan said. His mind was running calculations constantly, adjusting for wind, weight, drag. The valley holding Copper Ridge was coming into view now, a slash of civilization in the wilderness. He could see the runway, a gray stripe against brown earth, absurdly small from this height. We're too high, Matthews said, reading the instruments. We'll overshoot. No, Ryan said calmly. We're going to circle, burn off altitude in the valley, then make our approach from the north. But the winds? I know about the winds. Ryan was already banking the aircraft, feeling the response, the way it wanted to drop when he turned. Trust me. Matthews fell silent, and Ryan focused on the turn, the delicate balance of maintaining enough speed to keep the aircraft controllable while bleeding off altitude. The mountains rose around them like walls, and for a moment they were flying through a canyon of rock and ice, the peaks close enough that Ryan could see individual trees on the slopes. His combat training took over. The ability to process multiple streams of information simultaneously, to make split-second decisions with incomplete data, to maintain absolute calm while staring at death. He'd done this before. Different aircraft, different mountains, different stakes. But the fundamental equation was the same. Skill plus luck plus will equals survival. The question was whether the equation would balance. 8 miles, Matthews called out. Altitude 9,000. We're in the valley. Ryan completed the turn, lining up on what would be their approach path. Copper Ridge was directly ahead now, the runway orientation clear. He'd have to come in from the north, over the lower ridge, then drop fast to make the runway threshold. Flaps 10, he ordered. Matthews' hand moved to the flap lever. Flaps 10. The aircraft shuddered as the flaps deployed, creating additional lift and drag. Their descent rate increased slightly, but they were more controllable now, more responsive. 6 miles, 7,000 feet. Ryan's eyes moved constantly between the instruments and the view ahead. Wind was his enemy now. The gusts could push them off course, slam them into the valley walls, flip them on approach. But wind was also three-dimensional, and if he could read it right, use it right, it might give them the margin they needed. Matthews, I need you to call out airspeed and altitude continuously. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Current speed 190 knots, altitude 6,200. Good. Keep it coming. Ryan nudged the yoke, adjusting their path. The runway was growing larger, more defined. He could see the numbers painted on the threshold, 26. And the white stripes that marked the landing zone, 3,500 feet of asphalt to stop a 767 moving at close to 200 miles per hour. Flaps 20, he said, Vats. Flaps 20. Speed 185, altitude 5,000. The aircraft dropped faster now, the increased drag pulling them down. Ryan compensated, adjusting the angle, keeping them on the invisible glide path he'd calculated. No instruments to guide them, no precision approach system. Just his eyes and hands, and the knowledge carved into his nervous system from thousands of hours in the air. 4 miles, 4,000 feet, speed 180. They were committed now. No turning back, no second chances. The valley walls rose on either side, funneling them toward the runway. Ryan could see buildings now, cars in the parking lot, people running toward emergency positions. Landing gear down, he ordered. Matthews hesitated for just a second. Deploying the gear would increase their drag dramatically, kill precious speed, but he pulled the lever. The hydraulic whine was different without engine power, slower, but the indicators showed 3 green lights. Gear down and locked. The aircraft dropped like a stone. Speed 165, altitude 3,000, rate of descent 2,000 feet per minute. Too fast. They were coming down too fast. Ryan pulled back slightly on the yoke, trying to flatten their descent without losing too much speed. The stall warning chirped, a reminder that without engines, the line between controlled flight and catastrophic stall was measured in knots. Flaps 30, he said. Flaps 30. Speed 160, 2,500 feet. The runway was rushing up now, details crystallizing, cracks in the asphalt, tire marks from previous landings, the numbers growing larger. Ryan could see the windsock whipping violently in the gusts, see the emergency vehicles staging at the side of the runway, see the faces of ground crew watching the impossible approach. 2 miles, 2,000 feet, speed 155. They were too high and too fast. The math was wrong. They were going to overshoot the runway, slam into the terrain beyond, and 300 people would die because Ryan Hale thought he could cheat death one more time. His hands tightened on the yoke. Full flaps, he said quietly. Sir, we'll stall. Full flaps, now. Matthews pulled the lever all the way. The flaps deployed to their maximum extension, creating massive drag. The aircraft shuddered, the nose wanting to drop, the stall warning screaming now. And they fell. 1,000 feet, speed 145, descent rate 3,000. Ryan fought the controls, every instinct screaming at him to add power, to arrest the descent. But there was no power, only gravity and will and the desperate hope that he could time this exactly right. 500 feet, 140. The runway threshold was directly ahead. They were going to make it, barely, impossibly, but they were going to make it to the runway. 200 feet, 135, we're too fast, we're too fast. Ryan waited, counted seconds, felt the aircraft's energy, its momentum, its desire to fly, and its inevitable submission to gravity. 100 feet. He pulled back on the yoke, flaring the aircraft, trading their forward speed for lift, bleeding off energy in the desperate seconds before touchdown. The runway rushed up, the white stripes blurring, the numbers filling his vision. 50 feet, 130. Brace, Ryan shouted. Brace for impact. In the cabin, Sarah's voice echoed his command. Brace, heads down, brace, 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 brace. The main landing gear struck asphalt with a scream of tortured metal and rubber. The impact slammed Ryan forward against his harness, the yoke nearly tearing from his hands. The nose gear came down hard, the strut compressing almost to its limits. And then they were rolling. Ryan's hands flew to the spoiler controls, deploying the panels that would kill their remaining lift and slam them onto the runway. His feet found the brake pedals, applying pressure carefully, steadily, feeling for the edge of a skid. The runway was disappearing beneath them at terrifying speed. Reversers won't work without engines, Matthews said, his voice high with panic. I know, maximum brakes. Now. They both pressed the pedals to the floor. The brake temperature gauges climbed rapidly, yellow, red, warning lights flashing. The smell of burning rubber and hot metal filled the cockpit. The runway end was approaching. Beyond it, a fence, then rough terrain, then trees. 3,500 feet, 100 miles. They needed 4,000. The aircraft was decelerating, but not fast enough. Ryan could feel the brakes starting to fade, the pedals getting softer as the systems overheated. They were still moving at over 100 miles per hour, still eating up runway. 2,000 feet remaining, 1,000 feet. Ryan pulled the emergency brake, a backup system he'd hoped not to need. The aircraft shuddered, slewing slightly to the left. He corrected with rudder, keeping them centered on the runway. 500 feet. We're not going to make it, Matthews whispered. Ryan didn't answer. His entire world had narrowed to the feel of the aircraft, the decreasing speed, the approaching fence. Time seemed to stretch, each second elastic and endless. 200 feet. 100. The fence was right there, the posts visible, the chain link catching sunlight. 50 feet. And the aircraft stopped. The nose was perhaps 20 feet from the fence, close enough that Ryan could have opened his window and touched it. The emergency vehicles were already racing toward them, sirens wailing, foam cannons ready. For a long moment, neither Ryan nor Matthews moved. They simply sat in their seats, breathing, staring at the fence that had almost become their tombstone. Then Matthews started laughing, high, slightly hysterical laughter born of relief and disbelief. We made it! Oh my God, we made it! Ryan released his harness with shaking hands. We need to evacuate, get the slides deployed. Matthews nodded, reaching for the controls, and Ryan turned in his seat to look back through the cockpit door. The cabin was chaos. People crying, shouting, embracing strangers, some still in brace position, unable to believe they'd stopped moving. Sarah appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. We're down. We're actually down. Emergency evacuation, Ryan said. By the book. Can you handle it? She nodded, already moving, her training overriding her emotions. Slides deploying now! The sound of the emergency slides inflating was like thunder. Ryan helped Matthews unbuckle the still unconscious captain, and together they maneuvered Hughes toward the cockpit door. Emergency personnel were already boarding through the forward door, paramedics with equipment, firefighters in full gear. We've got him, a paramedic said, taking Hughes from Ryan's arms. You're the pilot? Yes. You need to evacuate, sir. Now. But Ryan didn't move. He stood in the cockpit doorway watching the organized chaos of the evacuation. Passengers sliding down the emergency chutes, some screaming, some laughing, all alive. Flight attendants managing the flow, emergency personnel helping those who needed it, the whole beautiful machinery of survival in motion. 300 people, 300 lives that had been seconds from ending, and he'd saved them all. The weight of it hit him suddenly, completely. Not pride, he'd lost the capacity for that 7 years ago, but something else. Relief, maybe, or absolution. He'd flown again, and this time, everyone lived. "Sir, you need to evacuate." The firefighter was insistent now, taking Ryan's arm. Ryan nodded, allowing himself to be guided toward the door. His legs felt weak, adrenaline crash hitting him hard. He made it to the emergency slide and sat at the top, looking down at the crowd of survivors gathered on the tarmac below. And there, looking up at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, was Evelyn Cross. She was still holding his phone. Ryan pushed off and slid down, the ride jarring and graceless. He stumbled at the bottom, and hands reached out to steady him. Passengers whose names he didn't know, whose lives he'd just saved, touching him with reverence and gratitude. "Thank you," someone said. "You saved us," another voice. "I thought we were dead. I thought—" The voices blurred together, and Ryan pushed through them gently, heading toward Evelyn. She stood apart from the others, her expensive clothes disheveled, her makeup ruined by tears, looking more human than she had in the entire flight before everything went wrong. "Your phone," she said, holding it out. Ryan took it, checking the message. Still unsent. Thank God. "Emma doesn't need to know how close it was," he said quietly. Evelyn's eyes were red, her voice rough. "Who are you?" "Nobody," Ryan said. "Just a father trying to get to Boston." "That's not true." She stepped closer and he could see she was shaking. "You're a pilot, a real one. Combat experience, you said military." "Was," Ryan interrupted. "I was a pilot, past tense. I work maintenance now." "Why?" The question was immediate, almost aggressive. "Why would you walk away from—" She gestured at the aircraft, at the impossible landing, at the evidence of his extraordinary skill. From this, Ryan's jaw tightened. Around them, emergency personnel were organizing the evacuation, counting heads, treating minor injuries. Investigators were already photographing the aircraft, documenting the impossible landing that would become a case study. "Because the last time I flew him," he said quietly, "my wingman died. I brought my plane home. He didn't. And I promised myself I'd never be responsible for other people's lives again." Evelyn stared at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "But you just saved 300 people." "I didn't have a choice." "Yes, you did. You could have stayed in your seat. Let someone else try. Let it just happen." Ryan shook his head. "There was a 7-year-old girl on that plane, row 14, window seat. I saw her when I walked back from the bathroom before the engines failed. She was reading a book about horses and wearing a dress with stars on it. When the masks dropped, she was brave. Didn't cry. Held her mother's hand." His voice cracked slightly. "She reminded me of Emma, and I thought, if someone could save my daughter, would they? Or would they stay in their seat because it was easier than trying?" Evelyn's tears were flowing again, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "I judged you," she said. "From the moment you sat down, I looked at your hands and your clothes and decided you didn't belong in business class. That you were less." "I know," Ryan said simply. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You weren't wrong about the seat. I saved for 8 months to afford it. Every extra shift, every overtime hour. Because 6 hours to Boston instead of 10 means more time with Emma." He looked at her directly. "I'm exactly what you thought I was. A working guy who doesn't belong in your world." "No," Evelyn said firmly. "You're someone who just did the impossible. Someone who sacrificed everything for people he didn't know. Someone who—" She stopped, searching for words. "You're better than anyone I know." Ryan's smile was sad. "I'm really not. I'm just a father who wants to see his daughter." An FAA investigator approached them, holding a clipboard. Excuse me, are you the pilot who landed the aircraft? Yes, Ryan said. I'm going to need a full statement. What you just did. The investigator shook his head in disbelief. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen a dead stick landing in a 767, particularly not in these conditions. You should be dead. Everyone on that plane should be dead. But we're not, Ryan said quietly. No, you're not, because of you. The investigator's radio crackled with traffic. I need you to come with me. This is going to be a long debrief. Ryan nodded, then turned back to Evelyn. Tell them I need 5 minutes. The investigator started to protest, but something in Ryan's expression stopped him. 5 minutes. Then we really need to start. When they were alone again, or as alone as two people could be in the middle of an emergency scene, Ryan pulled out his phone and typed quickly. Then he showed Evelyn the message. Emma, Daddy's plane had some trouble, but everything's okay now. I'll call you as soon as I can. I love you bigger than the sky. See you this weekend. Better message, Evelyn said softly. Ryan sent it, then pocketed the phone. Thank you for holding on to it, for... He gestured vaguely. Everything. I didn't do anything. You reminded me why it mattered. Ryan looked back at the plane, at the survivors being loaded into buses, at the emergency personnel still working. I thought I was done with flying, done with being responsible. But maybe... He trailed off. Maybe what? Evelyn prompted. Maybe I was just waiting for a reason to come back. Before Evelyn could respond, Matthews emerged from the crowd, escorted by paramedics. When he saw Ryan, he broke away and ran toward him, tears streaming down his face. You saved us, Matthews said, his voice breaking. I froze. I didn't know what to do, and you just... He couldn't finish, simply stood there crying like a child. Ryan pulled the young first officer into an embrace, and Evelyn watched this moment of grace between two men who had faced death together. You did fine, Ryan said quietly. You kept it together when it mattered. That takes courage. I thought everyone was going to die because of me. But they didn't. And now you know you can handle it when things go wrong. That knowledge, Ryan pulled back, looking Matthews in the eye. That's what makes you a real pilot. Not the hours in your logbook. The knowledge that you can face the worst and still function. Matthews nodded, wiping his eyes, and allowed the paramedics to lead him away for evaluation. Evelyn had watched the entire exchange in silence, seeing layers in Ryan she had completely missed during their hours sitting side by side. This man who worked maintenance, this father who counted overtime shifts, this pilot who had walked away from the sky, this hero who didn't want to be called one. What will you do now? She asked. Ryan shrugged. Give my statement to the FAA. Probably get interrogated by the NTSB for the next week. Eventually make it to Boston to see Emma, though I guess not on the original flight. I mean, after that. Will you fly again? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to fully examine. I don't know, Ryan admitted. 7 years ago I promised myself I was done, that I'd find a different way to matter. But today, he looked at the aircraft, at the people who were walking away from a landing that should have been impossible. Today I remembered what it feels like to make a difference. You made a difference every time you flew, Evelyn said. Every safe landing, every mission completed. You just couldn't see it. No, Ryan said softly. I saw it. I just couldn't live with the cost. The FAA investigator was approaching again, less patient this time. Ryan raised a hand in acknowledgement. I have to go, he said to Evelyn. But maybe... He hesitated, then pulled out his phone again and held it out. Maybe we could stay in touch. I'd like to know that you're okay. After all this. Evelyn took the phone and entered her number, her hand steadier now. I'd like that too. They stood there for a moment longer. Two people who had been strangers hours ago, now connected by circumstance and survival and the strange intimacy of facing death together. Then Ryan walked away toward the investigator, and Evelyn watched him go. This man who had judged himself more harshly than she ever could, who carried guilt like armor, who had just proven that redemption was always possible if you were brave enough to try. Around her, the survivors were being organized, buses arriving to take them to the terminal. The aircraft sat silent on the runway, its landing gear splayed, brake assemblies smoking, but fundamentally intact. A monument to impossible skill and desperate courage. Evelyn looked at her phone, at Ryan's number glowing on the screen, and thought about the message she had held for him. The final words to a daughter who might have lost her father today, but didn't. Because sometimes, just sometimes, the person you dismissed as ordinary turned out to be exactly what extraordinary looked like. The hotel room in Denver felt too quiet after everything that had happened. Evelyn stood by the window, looking out at the city lights blurring through glass that needed cleaning, her reflection ghostly and unfamiliar. The airline had put all the passengers up for the night while they arranged new flights, and she should have been relieved. Instead, she felt hollowed out, like someone had reached inside her chest and rearranged everything she thought she knew about herself. Her phone buzzed. The board meeting in Boston had been rescheduled. Her assistant had handled it with the efficiency Evelyn paid her obscene amounts of money to deliver. The acquisition could wait. The startup wasn't going anywhere. The empire she had built would still be there tomorrow. But would she? That was the question that had been circling her mind for the past 6 hours, ever since she'd watched Ryan Hale walk away with the FAA investigators, his shoulders carrying weight that had nothing to do with the heroic landing and everything to do with ghosts she couldn't see. She had spent the afternoon in debriefing sessions, giving her account to investigators who seemed less interested in her observations and more fascinated by the miracle they were documenting. A dead stick landing in a commercial aircraft, in mountain terrain, by a pilot who hadn't flown in 7 years. The word impossible kept appearing in their notes, always followed by, but it happened. Evelyn had told them about Ryan's calm, his competence, the way he'd moved through the crisis like someone who had trained for exactly this nightmare. She had not told them about her own prejudice, her silent judgment, the way she'd measured his worth by the oil stains on his hands. That shame was hers alone to carry. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from an unknown number. Made it through the Inquisition. They're calling it the Copper Ridge Miracle. Guess that's better than the Copper Ridge disaster. How are you holding up? Evelyn stared at the message, recognizing Ryan's dry humor even through text. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trying to formulate a response that was honest without being pathetic. I'm okay. Are you? That's a stupid question. Of course you're not okay. The response came quickly. Define okay. I'm alive. Emma knows I'm safe. The FAA isn't charging me with anything. By some measures, this is a good day. By any measure, you're a hero. A longer pause this time. Then, heroes don't run away from what they're good at. They don't spend 7 years hiding. I'm just someone who got a second chance to do the right thing. Evelyn sat on the edge of the hotel bed, her expensive luggage still unopened in the corner. Can I buy you a drink? I know you probably have 1,000 things to do, but I'd like to talk, if that's okay. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before his response came through. Hotel bar in 30 minutes? 28 minutes later, Evelyn walked into the hotel's dimly lit bar and found Ryan already there, sitting in a corner booth with a glass of what looked like whiskey in front of him, untouched. He'd changed out of his oil-stained work clothes into jeans and a simple button-down shirt that looked like it had been packed carefully at the bottom of his duffel. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline crash written in every line of his face. You didn't drink it, she observed, sliding into the seat across from him. Haven't decided if I should celebrate or mourn, Ryan said. Seems safer to wait. A server appeared, and Evelyn ordered a vodka martini, then immediately regretted it. It felt performative, like she was playing the role of Evelyn Cross, tech CEO, when that person suddenly felt like a costume she wasn't sure fit anymore. The FAA said, "You're not in any trouble," she said. That you probably saved their investigators months of work by landing the plane mostly intact. Ryan's smile was brief and didn't reach his eyes. They're being diplomatic. Truth is, if I'd screwed up, there wouldn't be enough left to investigate. So yeah, I guess I did them a favor. You did all of us a favor. 300 people went home tonight because of you. 312, Ryan corrected quietly. Including crew. I counted. Of course he had. Evelyn realized this man probably knew exactly how many lives had been in his hands, had probably memorized that number the moment he stood up in the cabin and said 3 words that changed everything. Her drink arrived, and she took a sip, tasting nothing. "Tell me about your wingman." Ryan's hand tightened on his glass. "That's not a first drink conversation." "Maybe it needs to be. Maybe that's why you're sitting here with whiskey you won't drink, looking like you saved the world but lost something anyway." For a long moment, Ryan didn't respond. The bar was nearly empty. Most of the Flight 1847 passengers were in their rooms, processing trauma in private. Soft jazz played from invisible speakers, incongruous and sad. "His name was Marcus Chen," Ryan said finally. "We flew together for 3 years. He was the best natural pilot I'd ever seen. Better than me, if I'm being honest. Could feel the aircraft like it was part of his body. Had a wife and twin daughters. Used to show me pictures every single flight." Ryan's voice was steady, but Evelyn could hear the cost of that steadiness. "We were on a supply run in Afghanistan. Routine mission. Should have been easy. But intel was bad and we flew into an ambush. Ground fire, RPGs, the whole nightmare. Marcus took a hit to his engine, started losing altitude. I should have..." He stopped, took a breath. "I should have stayed with him, covered his descent. But my orders were to complete the mission, deliver the supplies to the outpost that was depending on them." "So you followed orders," Evelyn said softly. "I followed orders. Completed the mission. Brought my aircraft home safe, and Marcus went down in hostile territory. They found his body 3 days later." Ryan finally picked up his glass, looked at the amber liquid, then set it down again without drinking. "The citation said I showed exceptional judgment under fire, that I prioritized the mission and saved lives at the outpost. They gave me a medal." "But you blamed yourself." "He had a family. Those supplies I delivered, they would have lasted another day, maybe 2. But Marcus, he doesn't get another day. His daughters don't get another day with their father. And I have to live with the fact that I chose cargo over my wingman." Evelyn reached across the table and took the glass from in front of him, then took his hand instead. His fingers were rough, scarred, real, in a way that nothing in her carefully curated life had been for years. "You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation," she said. "And you've been punishing yourself ever since." "Someone should," Ryan said. "The Air Force said I was a hero. Marcus's wife said she understood. Everyone said I did the right thing, but they weren't there. They didn't see his face when he realized I wasn't staying with him." "Is that why you left? Why you stopped flying?" Ryan nodded slowly. "I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't make those calculations. Couldn't be responsible for deciding who lives and who dies. So I walked away. Found work that was simple, mechanical. Engines don't have families. They don't trust you with their lives. You fix them or you don't, and nobody dies either way." "Until today," Evelyn said. "Until today." Ryan met her eyes, and she saw the raw confusion there, the man trying to reconcile 7 years of self-imposed exile with the reality of what he'd just accomplished. "I spent all this time believing I didn't deserve to fly again, that I'd lost the right to it when I lost Marcus. But when that first officer asked if anyone had flight experience, I didn't even think. I just stood up." "Because you're not the person you've been telling yourself you are," Evelyn said. "You're not a coward who abandoned his wingman. You're someone who made a terrible choice in a terrible moment and then spent 7 years trying to atone for it. That doesn't change what happened." "No, but it changes what happens next." Ryan pulled his hand back gently, leaning against the booth. "What do you want from me, Evelyn? We survived a plane crash together. That doesn't mean you know me. Doesn't mean you understand what I'm carrying." "You're right," Evelyn admitted. "I don't know you, but I know who I was this morning, sitting in that seat next to you, judging you because your hands were dirty and your clothes were worn. I know that person, and I hate her." She took a long drink of her martini, feeling the vodka burn. "I built an empire by being ruthless, by cutting away anything soft, anything that made me vulnerable. I convinced myself that success was worth any sacrifice, that being at the top meant I'd won some kind of war against my own past." "And now?" Ryan asked. "Now I watched a man I'd dismissed as beneath me save my life and 300 others. Now I'm sitting in a hotel bar wondering what the hell I've been doing for the past 20 years and why the empire I built feels so goddamn empty. The confession hung between them, raw and honest in a way Evelyn hadn't been with anyone in years. Maybe ever. Ryan's expression softened slightly. You're being too hard on yourself. Am I? Because I spent an hour on that plane thinking I was going to die, and the only thing I could think about was that nobody would actually miss me. My company would find a new CEO, my board would release a respectful statement, and life would go on exactly as it had before, because I never let anyone close enough to matter. That's not true. It is, though. I have employees, not friends. Business relationships, not personal ones. I chose this life deliberately, Ryan. I chose success over connection, achievement over love. And I told myself I was fine with it. But when that plane was falling, all I could think about was your message to Emma. That unconditional love, that absolute certainty that you mattered to someone. Evelyn's voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. I don't have that. I don't have anyone who would get a final message. And I realized that makes me the poorest person on that entire aircraft. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. Then he said something she didn't expect. It's not too late. Isn't it? I'm 42 years old. I've burned every bridge, sacrificed every relationship, built walls so high nobody could possibly climb them. How do you come back from that? The same way I'm trying to come back from Marcus. Ryan finally took a sip of his whiskey, grimacing slightly. You forgive yourself. You acknowledge that the person you were made choices that hurt you, and then you make different choices going forward. That's simple? I didn't say simple. I said possible. He set the glass down with a soft click. I spent 7 years punishing myself, working jobs that were beneath my training, deliberately keeping myself small because I thought that's what I deserved. But today, when those 300 people needed me, I couldn't stay small. I had to be who I actually am, not who I decided I should be. And who are you? Evelyn asked. Ryan considered the question with the same careful attention he'd probably given to landing calculations. I'm a pilot who made a mistake and lost someone important. I'm a father who would do anything for his daughter. I'm someone who walked away from his calling because he was scared of the cost. And as of today, I'm someone who learned that running away doesn't actually solve anything. So what will you do? I don't know yet. The FAA said there are airlines that would be interested in talking to me. Apparently landing a dead 767 in the mountains is the kind of resume item that gets attention. His smile was self-deprecating. But I've got Emma to think about, and she needs stability, not a father who's gone for days at a time flying international routes. What if there was another option? Evelyn heard herself say. Ryan raised an eyebrow. What kind of option? She hadn't planned this, hadn't thought it through, but suddenly the idea was there, complete and obvious. Crosstech has corporate aircraft, 3 jets used for executive travel, client meetings, international negotiations. We contract pilots through an agency, but they're not... She paused, choosing words carefully. They're not you. You want to hire me? Ryan's tone was carefully neutral. I want to offer you a job where you can fly again without sacrificing time with Emma. Corporate aviation, based wherever you want. You'd set your own schedule around your custody arrangement. The pay would be competitive, benefits comprehensive, and you'd be flying equipment you're qualified for. Evelyn, before you say no, just think about it. You just proved you're still one of the best pilots alive. You shouldn't be wasting that gift on maintenance work, no matter how noble the penance feels. Ryan shook his head slowly. You're offering this because you feel guilty, because you judged me, and now you want to make it right. Maybe, Evelyn admitted, or maybe I'm offering it because my company needs someone with integrity flying our executives around, and I just watched you demonstrate more integrity in one impossible landing than I've seen in 20 years of corporate leadership. I don't need charity. This isn't charity, it's business. I need qualified pilots. You need a way to fly that doesn't conflict with being Emma's father. That's just pragmatism. But they both knew it was more than that. This was Evelyn trying to fix something broken, trying to build a bridge to someone real in a life that had become nothing but professional facades and strategic relationships. I need to think about it, Ryan said finally. Of course. Take all the time you need. Evelyn finished her martini, feeling the alcohol hit her empty stomach. Can I ask you something? About Marcus. Ryan tensed but nodded.
Do you think he would want this? You spending 7 years in exile, denying who you are, punishing yourself? No, Ryan said quietly. Marcus would tell me I'm being an idiot, that he made his own choices that day, same as I did, that we were both following training and orders and doing our best in a situation that had no good answers. Then maybe it's time to listen to him. Ryan's laugh was bitter. Easy to say. Nothing about any of this is easy, Evelyn countered, but that doesn't mean it's not right. They sat in silence for a while, two damaged people who had found each other in the worst possible circumstances, trying to figure out what came next. The bar was closing now, the server making pointed movements with glasses and towels. I should go, Ryan said, sliding out of the booth. Early debriefing tomorrow with the NTSB. They want every detail of the landing for their report. Ryan, Evelyn said as he stood, thank you. Not just for today, but for this. But
for being honest with me. You made it easy, he said. Most people don't actually want honesty. They want comfortable. I've had comfortable my whole life. It's overrated. Ryan's smile was real this time, reaching his eyes. Text me about that job thing. I'm serious about needing to think about it, but I'm also serious about considering it. I will. She watched him walk away. This man who had saved her life and somehow, impossibly, made her want to save her own. The bar felt even emptier after he left, and Evelyn sat there for a long time, staring at her empty glass and thinking about choices and consequences and the strange paths that led two people to sit beside each other at 37,000 feet. Her phone buzzed with an email from her assistant, marked urgent. The acquisition target was getting cold feet, questioning the terms, threatening to explore other offers. 6 months ago, Evelyn would have been on the phone immediately, deploying her full arsenal of negotiation tactics and subtle threats. Instead, she archived the email and opened a new message. Rachel, I need you to research corporate aviation programs, particularly models that allow flexible scheduling for pilots with custody arrangements. Also, I want a full review of our pilot contracting procedures. Let's discuss Monday. She hit send, then opened another new message, this one to her lawyer. David, I need you to draft employment terms for a senior pilot position, competitive salary, full benefits, schedule flexibility for single parent. I'll send specifications Monday, but I want preliminary documents ready by end of week. It was impulsive, possibly reckless, definitely outside her normal, methodical approach to business decisions. But Evelyn had learned something today about the difference between running towards success and running away from yourself. She was done running. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ms. Cross, this is Jennifer Malik. I'm a producer with CNN. I understand you were on Flight 1847 today, and I was hoping to talk to you about the landing. We're putting together a segment on the pilot, Ryan Hale, and we'd love to get passenger perspectives on— No, Evelyn said firmly. I understand you might need time to process, but this is a remarkable human interest story, and you don't understand, Evelyn interrupted. Ryan Hale is a private person who did something extraordinary in circumstances he never wanted to face again. The last thing he needs is media attention turning his trauma into entertainment. With respect, Ms. Cross, the public has a right to nothing. Ryan Hale has a right to privacy, to process what happened, to be with his daughter without cameras documenting his every move. If CNN wants a story, talk to the FAA. Talk to the airline, but leave him alone. She hung up before the producer could respond, then immediately called Ryan. Hey, he answered, sounding tired. Everything okay? CNN just called me asking for an interview about you. I told them no, but I wanted to warn you. The story's getting out, and they're going to come after you hard. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Yeah, I figured that was coming. The investigators mentioned media interest. Apparently, dead stick landings make for good television. You don't have to talk to them. You don't owe anyone your story. I know, but maybe— He paused, and Evelyn could hear him thinking through it. Maybe it's not about owing them. Maybe it's about Marcus. What do you mean? If I tell the story right, I can talk about him, about the choices pilots have to make, about the people who don't come home. It won't change anything, but at least his name gets remembered for something other than being the guy I left behind.
Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest. This man, carrying impossible guilt, still thinking about how to honor his friend, still trying to make meaning from tragedy. If you decide to talk to them, I'll help you vet the reporters. Make sure they're serious, not just looking for sensational sound bites. You don't have to do that. I know, but I want to. Let me do something useful for someone other than myself for once. Ryan's laugh was soft and maybe a little sad. Okay, thank you. Get some rest, Ryan. Tomorrow's going to be intense. You too, Evelyn. And hey, that thing you said in the bar about not having anyone who would get a final message, that's not true anymore. You've got my number now. That means something. The call ended before she could respond, and Evelyn sat in the empty bar holding her phone, feeling tears slide down her cheeks for the second time in one day. She had spent 20 years building walls, and this stranger had walked through them in a single impossible afternoon. The next morning, Evelyn found herself in the hotel restaurant, picking at eggs she didn't want while scrolling through news coverage of the landing. The story was everywhere. Miracle at Copper Ridge. Combat pilot saves 300 in mountain landing. 7 years after leaving the cockpit. Hero returns. None of them got it right. They focused on the dramatic landing, the impossible odds, the technical details. But they missed the real story, the one about a man who thought he'd lost the right to fly and found his way back to the sky through an emergency he'd spent 7 years hoping to avoid. Her phone buzzed. Ryan. Breakfast? I'm in the restaurant too, corner table by the window. She found him easily, sitting alone with coffee and what looked like untouched toast. He'd clearly slept about as well as she had, which was to say not at all. Morning, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Morning. Saw the news coverage? Hard to miss it. How are you handling it? Ryan shrugged. The FAA's handling media relations for now, which buys me some time, but I called Marcus's wife last night. Thought she should hear about it from me before seeing it on television. How did she take it? She cried, said she was proud of me, said Marcus would have been proud too. His voice was rough. Then she asked if I was going to fly again, and I didn't know what to tell her. Evelyn poured herself coffee from the carafe on the table. What did you say? That I didn't know. That for 7 years I've been certain I couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't, but yesterday I did and everyone lived, and now I don't know anything anymore. That's honest. Honest is all I've got left. Ryan finally took a bite of toast, chewing mechanically. The NTSB wants me back this afternoon for more interviews. They're building a case study, apparently, trying to understand how the hell I pulled it off. Did you tell them about Marcus? Not yet, but I will. They need to understand that yesterday wasn't just skill or training. It was 7 years of guilt giving me absolutely no choice but to succeed. You can't fail when failure means becoming exactly what you're afraid you already are. The weight of that statement settled between them. Evelyn understood it perfectly, the way fear could become motivation, how running from yourself could sometimes look like running towards something noble. I talked to my team this morning, she said, about the pilot position. It's real, if you want it. Base salary plus flight pay, full benefits, schedule built around your custody arrangement. You'd be our chief pilot, which means you'd also help me rebuild the whole aviation program. Why are you doing this? Ryan asked directly. And don't tell me it's just business. Evelyn met his eyes. Met his, because yesterday I almost died, and the only thing I regretted was the person I'd become. Because you showed me that it's possible to carry guilt and still do the right thing. Because I've spent 20 years building a company and forgetting to build a life, and you reminded me that those things aren't actually separate. That's a lot to put on a pilot you met yesterday. Maybe. Or maybe when you survive something impossible with someone, you get to be honest about what it changed. Ryan was quiet, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. I need to see Emma first. Need to hold my daughter and remember why any of this matters. Then, I need to figure out if I can actually do this. Put on a uniform, take responsibility for lives again, walk back into the thing that broke me. Take all the time you need, Evelyn said. The job will be there whenever you're ready, or if you're never ready, that's okay too. Is it? Because it feels like you're trying to save me, and I'm not sure I'm worth saving. Everyone's worth saving, Ryan. Even people who don't believe it themselves. He smiled then, sad and knowing.
Is that what we're doing here? Saving each other? Maybe, Evelyn admitted. Or maybe we're just two broken people who ended up in the same impossible situation and came out the other side different than we went in. Different how? I don't know yet, but I'm willing to find out if you are. Ryan extended his hand across the table, and Evelyn took it. His grip was firm, calloused, real. A working man's hand that had guided 300 people away from death. Partners in figuring this out? He asked. Partners, Evelyn agreed. They sat like that for a moment, holding on to each other and the fragile possibility that maybe, impossibly, yesterday's tragedy could become tomorrow's redemption. Then Ryan's phone rang, and he checked the screen. It's Emma. I need to take this. Go, Evelyn said immediately. She watched him walk away, phone pressed to his ear, and heard the moment he connected with his daughter, the way his entire voice changed, softened, filled with uncomplicated love. Hey, baby girl? Yeah, Daddy's okay. I'm completely fine. I know it was scary, but everything worked out. I'll be there this weekend, I promise. Nothing could keep me away from you. Evelyn listened to him soothe his daughter's fears, promise impossible things, be exactly the father Emma needed him to be. And she understood that whatever happened next, whether Ryan took the job or didn't, whether they stayed in touch or drifted apart, yesterday had fundamentally changed her. She had met someone who measured success by the number of bedtime stories he could read in person instead of the number of zeros in his bank account. Someone who thought walking away from greatness for the sake of his child was the obvious choice, not a sacrifice worth discussing. Someone who had saved her life and then quietly gone back to being himself, expecting no praise, wanting no recognition. The server approached with the check, and Evelyn handed over her corporate card automatically. Small gesture, but it felt important somehow. Buying breakfast for the man who had saved her life. Insufficient payment for an impossible debt. Ryan returned, sliding back into his seat. Emma's okay now. She saw the news coverage, but her mother explained it carefully. She thinks her daddy's a superhero. She's not wrong. She's 7. Everything looks like superhero stuff at 7. But Evelyn could see the emotion in his eyes, the way his daughter's faith in him had cracked something open. She wants to know when I'm coming home. When are you? Soon as the NTSB releases me. Maybe tomorrow, day after at the latest. Jessica's being flexible about the schedule, given the circumstances. That's good. You should be with her. Yeah. Ryan looked at Evelyn with an expression she couldn't quite read. Come with me. What? To Boston. Meet Emma. See the life I'm trying to protect. Maybe it'll help you understand why I can't just jump back into flying without thinking it through. Evelyn's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't do personal entanglements, didn't meet people's families, didn't blur the lines between professional and private. But then she remembered sitting in that plane, watching the mountains rise to meet them, and thinking that she'd wasted her entire life avoiding exactly this kind of connection. Okay, she said. I'd like that. Ryan's smile was surprised and genuine. Really? Really? I've got nothing waiting for me in Boston except a rescheduled board meeting that suddenly feels a lot less important than it did yesterday. It's just going to be playground visits and reading books and probably watching Frozen for the 1,000th time. Not exactly exciting for a CEO. Sounds perfect, Evelyn said, and meant it. They finished breakfast in companionable silence, two people learning how to be themselves around each other, trying to navigate the strange new terrain that yesterday's survival had created. Outside the window, Denver was waking up under clear blue skies, the mountains visible in the distance, beautiful and deadly and utterly indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in their shadow. Somewhere up there, Flight 1847 had fallen from the sky, and somehow, impossibly, everyone had lived. Not just survived, Evelyn thought, but maybe, just maybe, learned how to actually live. The flight to Boston 2 days later felt surreal. Evelyn sat beside Ryan in first class, seats she'd insisted on booking for both of them despite his protests, and watched him stare out the window during takeoff with an expression that was part reverence, part grief. His hands gripped the armrests, not from fear but from muscle memory, fingers twitching slightly as if they wanted to be on controls instead of upholstery. You okay? She asked quietly, once they'd reached cruising altitude. Ryan turned from the window, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. First time as a passenger since I stopped flying. Feels wrong somehow. Like I should be up front, not back here. Maybe you should be. Maybe. He accepted a coffee from the flight attendant with a quiet thank you, then cradled the cup without drinking. I keep thinking about the pilots up there, wondering if they know how close we all are to disaster on every single flight. How many things have to go exactly right for this metal tube to stay in the air? Does it help, knowing how it all works? Makes it worse, actually. Ignorance is probably more comfortable. He finally took a sip, grimacing at the temperature. Emma's excited to meet you, by the way. Jessica told her daddy made a new friend who wants to come visit. The word friend felt both inadequate and overwhelming. Evelyn didn't have friends. She had business associates, strategic relationships, people she networked with at conferences. But what she and Ryan had built over the past 48 hours existed outside those categories, something forged in crisis and tempered by brutal honesty. I'm nervous, Evelyn admitted. I don't know how to talk to children. You talk to them like they're people. Emma's 7, not stupid. She'll know if you're being fake. Ryan's smile was gentle. Just be yourself, the real yourself, not the CEO version. What if the real me isn't very good with kids? Then we'll find that out together. But I think you'll surprise yourself. Boston greeted them with gray skies and the kind of cold that cut through expensive coats like they were tissue paper. Jessica had offered to let Ryan borrow her car, a gesture of co-parenting cooperation that Evelyn found both admirable and heartbreaking. They picked it up from Jessica's apartment in Brookline, a modest 2-bedroom where Emma lived full-time, and Evelyn caught a glimpse of the woman who had once been married to Ryan. Jessica was pretty in an understated way, with kind eyes and the efficient movements of someone who managed single parenthood while working full-time. She hugged Ryan like an old friend, asked him gentle questions about the landing, then turned to Evelyn with honest curiosity. You must be Evelyn. Ryan said you were on the flight together. I was. Your ex-husband saved my life. The words felt strange, too simple for what had actually happened. He's good at that, Jessica said, and there was no bitterness in it, just statement of fact. Emma's at school until 3. Ryan, you remember how to get there? Yeah? Thanks for being flexible about pickup. After what you just went through, I'm amazed you're even here. Most people would be taking a month off work. Jessica glanced at Evelyn, then back to Ryan. You're doing okay, though? Really? I'm working on it, Ryan said honestly. Some days are better than others. Jessica squeezed his arm. Call if you need anything. And Evelyn, take care of him. He's terrible at taking care of himself. They left with the car keys and directions to Emma's school, and Evelyn found herself sitting in a 10-year-old Honda Civic that smelled faintly of crayons and apple juice, watching Ryan navigate Boston traffic with the same calm competence he'd shown landing a dying aircraft. She seems nice, Evelyn said. Your ex-wife. Jessica's a good person. We just weren't good together. She wanted stability, routine, someone who came home every night. I was deployed half the time we were married, and even when I was home, I was still halfway in the cockpit. Ryan changed lanes smoothly. The divorce was the kindest thing I could have done for her. Did you love her? In my way, but not enough and not the right way. She deserved better than someone who loved flying more than coming home. And now? Ryan was quiet for a moment, staring at the road ahead. Now I love coming home because it means seeing Emma. Jessica gave me that gift. Even if our marriage couldn't survive, I'll always be grateful to her for it. They picked up coffee at a place Ryan said made the best cups in Boston, then drove to Emma's elementary school. Ryan parked across the street with a clear view of the main entrance, and they waited in companionable silence as parents and nannies began gathering for pickup. That's her, Ryan said suddenly, sitting forward. Evelyn looked and saw a small girl with dark hair and pigtails burst through the school doors, backpack bouncing, wearing a purple jacket and light-up sneakers. She was talking animatedly to another girl, hands gesturing wildly, her whole body vibrating with 7-year-old energy. The love on Ryan's face was so naked, so absolute, that Evelyn had to look away. This was what mattered, not empire building or quarterly profits or acquisition strategies. This small person in light-up sneakers who didn't know her father was a hero, only that he was Daddy, and he'd come to see her. Ryan got out of the car, and Emma spotted him immediately. Her whole face lit up like sunrise, and she ran toward him with complete abandon, leaving her friend mid-sentence. Ryan caught her and lifted her high, spinning her once before pulling her into a hug that looked like it was holding his entire world together. Evelyn watched through the windshield, feeling something crack open in her chest that she'd thought she'd sealed shut years ago. This was what she'd traded away for success, not just romantic love or partnership, but this kind of unconditional joy, this certainty that you mattered to someone more than anything else in the world. "Daddy, Daddy, I saw you on TV," Emma was saying as Ryan carried her back to the car. "You saved everybody. Mrs. Martinez said you're a hero, and we talked about it in class, and everybody wanted to know if you were really my daddy." "I'm really your daddy," Ryan said, settling her in the back seat and buckling her in. "And yes, there was some trouble on my flight, but everything worked out fine." "Were you scared?" "A little bit, but I knew I had to get home to see you, so I made sure the plane landed safely." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer. Then she noticed Evelyn in the front seat. "Who's that?" "This is my friend Evelyn. She was on the same flight. Evelyn, this is Emma." Evelyn turned to look at the little girl properly. Emma had Ryan's gray-blue eyes and a scattering of freckles across her nose. She studied Evelyn with the frank assessment of a child who hadn't yet learned to hide what she was thinking. "You're very pretty," Emma announced. "Are you Daddy's girlfriend?" "Emma," Ryan said, a warning note in his voice. "It's okay," Evelyn said quickly. "No, sweetie, I'm not your dad's girlfriend. We just met, but he helped me a lot when things were scary, and I wanted to meet you." "Because I'm the best part of Daddy?" The simple confidence in that statement, the absolute certainty that she was her father's favorite thing, made Evelyn's throat tight. "Yes, exactly that." Emma grinned, apparently satisfied. "Can we go get ice cream? Daddy always gets me ice cream when he visits." "Is that true?" Evelyn asked Ryan. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "We have a tradition, but we don't have to if you don't want—" "Ice cream sounds perfect," Evelyn interrupted. They found a small shop near Boston Common and settled into a corner booth with Emma between them. She ordered chocolate chip cookie dough with sprinkles and attacked it with the single-minded focus of a child who understood that adult conversation might interrupt dessert if she didn't eat quickly. "Tell me about school," Ryan said, and Emma launched into a detailed explanation of a science project about volcanoes that involved baking soda and vinegar and had apparently made a huge mess that Mrs. Martinez said was very enthusiastic but maybe too enthusiastic. Evelyn watched them talk, the easy flow of conversation between father and daughter. The way Ryan listened like Emma's stories about second grade were the most important things he'd ever heard. He wiped ice cream from her chin, reminded her to slow down so she didn't get brain freeze, and asked follow-up questions that showed he'd been paying attention to every previous conversation about school friends and playground politics. This was what he'd been protecting. This uncomplicated relationship with someone who loved him not for what he could do, but simply for existing. No wonder he'd walked away from flying. No wonder he'd chosen maintenance work over the cockpit. This little girl with ice cream on her nose was worth any sacrifice. "Evelyn, do you have kids?" Emma asked suddenly. "No, I don't." "Why not?" "Emma, that's not polite," Ryan started. "It's okay," Evelyn said. "I guess I was always too busy with work, sweetie. I have a big company, and it takes a lot of time." Emma considered this seriously. "That's sad. Kids are the best part of life. Daddy says so all the time." "Your daddy's very smart." "I know." Emma scraped the last of her ice cream from the bowl. "He's the smartest person ever, and the bravest. He landed a plane with no engines." "He did," Evelyn agreed. "It was incredibly brave." "Were you scared when it happened?" The question was innocent, but it hit Evelyn hard. She looked at Ryan, who nodded slightly, permission to be honest. "I was terrified," Evelyn admitted. "I thought we were going to crash, but your daddy came to the front of the plane and took control, and he was so calm and confident that I started to believe maybe we'd be okay." "And you were," Emma said triumphantly. Because Daddy can do anything. The faith in her voice was absolute, unshakable. To Emma, Ryan wasn't a man carrying guilt and trauma. He was simply Daddy, capable of miracles, deserving of complete trust. Evelyn wondered when she'd stopped believing anyone deserved that kind of faith. They walked through Boston Common after ice cream, Emma holding Ryan's hand and talking nonstop about everything and nothing. Her best friend Sophia's new puppy, the book they were reading in class, the elaborate fantasy game she and her friends played at recess involving princesses and dragons, and apparently a space station. "You're very creative," Evelyn observed. "Daddy says I get it from him. He used to tell me stories every night when I was little, before he moved to Seattle. Now he tells them on the phone, but it's not the same." Ryan's hand tightened on Emma's, and Evelyn saw the pain flash across his face. The cost of choosing work in Seattle over being close to his daughter. Another sacrifice, another piece of himself he'd given up. "What kind of stories?" Evelyn asked. "Adventures. Like, one time he told me about a princess who didn't want to be rescued. She wanted to fly airplanes. So she became a pilot and rescued herself." Emma skipped a little, her light-up shoes flashing. "That's my favorite." "Mine too," Ryan said quietly. They found a playground and Emma immediately ran to the swings. Ryan pushed her higher and higher while she shrieked with joy, her laughter cutting through the gray afternoon like sunlight. Evelyn sat on a nearby bench, watching this man who had saved 300 lives find even greater purpose in making one small girl laugh. "Higher, Daddy, higher! Any higher and you'll fly away. I can't fly without you." The words were innocent, playful, but Evelyn saw them land on Ryan like a physical blow. He slowed the swing gradually, helping Emma down, then sat beside Evelyn on the bench while Emma ran to the jungle gym. "She doesn't mean it like that," Evelyn said softly. "I know, but it's true anyway. I can't fly without her. She's the only thing that kept me grounded after Marcus. The only reason I didn't completely fall apart." Ryan watched his daughter climb with fearless confidence. "Every time I wanted to give up, I'd think about her needing me. And somehow that was enough. She's lucky to have you. I'm the lucky one. She makes everything make sense." He turned to look at Evelyn. "That job you offered, I want to take it, if it's still available." Evelyn felt her heart skip. "It is, but what changed? Watching you with Emma today, seeing you try to connect with her even though kids scare you, seeing you be real instead of polished, it made me realize that maybe the choice isn't between flying and being Emma's father. Maybe it's possible to be both if I do it right." "Corporate aviation would let you do that." "Yeah. Based in Boston, scheduled flights I can plan around custody arrangements, home every night instead of gone for days at a time." Ryan's voice was thoughtful. "I could actually be present in her life instead of this weekend dad who shows up with ice cream and guilt." "You're not just a weekend dad. Emma worships you. She loves the idea of me, the fun parent who doesn't do homework battles or bedtime negotiations. But Jessica's the one raising her, teaching her how to be a person. I'm just the exciting visitor." Evelyn heard the pain in that confession. The father who wanted more but had made choices that put him on the periphery of his daughter's daily life. "So change it," she said. "Take the job, move back to Boston, be the dad who does homework battles." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma hang upside down from the monkey bars. Then he said, "I need to tell you something about why I really left flying." Evelyn waited, sensing this was important. "Marcus dying. That was real, and it broke something in me. But it wasn't the only reason I walked away." Ryan's hands clenched on his knees. "The real reason was that I was good at it, really good. And I started to believe that made me invincible. Started taking risks I shouldn't have, making decisions based on ego instead of safety." "That doesn't sound like you." "It wasn't. Or it was, but a version of me I didn't like. After Marcus died, I had to face the fact that my arrogance might have contributed to the situation. That maybe if I'd been more humble, more cautious, I would have made different choices." "The investigation cleared you." "The investigation looked at protocols and procedures. It didn't look at the pilot's heart, the place where decisions really come from." Ryan met her eyes. "I'm telling you this because if I come work for you, I need you to understand who you're hiring. Not the hero from the news coverage, the man who walked away from his calling because he was afraid of who he was becoming. Evelyn reached over and took his hand. I'm hiring the man who spent 7 years learning humility, who chose his daughter over his ego, who landed a plane full of people he didn't know because it was the right thing to do, not because it would make him look good. How can you be sure that's who I am? Because I watched you in that cockpit, Ryan, and I saw someone who was terrified of failing but did it anyway. That's not arrogance, that's courage. Emma ran back to them, cheeks flushed from exertion.
Daddy, I'm hungry. Can we get pizza? Ryan scooped her up, settling her on his lap. What do you think, Evelyn? Pizza sound good? Pizza sounds perfect. They found a small Italian place that Emma declared the best pizza in the whole world, though Evelyn suspected she said that about every pizza place. Emma sat between them in the booth, coloring on the paper tablecloth with crayons the server brought, while Ryan and Evelyn talked around topics too heavy for 7-year-old ears. When would you want me to start? Ryan asked. If I take the job. Whenever you're ready. A month? 3 months? 6 months? I can wait. You're being awfully patient with someone who hasn't even formally accepted yet. I'm being strategic. Good pilots are hard to find. Pilots with your skills are basically impossible. I can afford to wait. Emma looked up from her coloring. Are you giving Daddy a job? I'm offering him one, Evelyn said. He has to decide if he wants it. Will it let him live here? In Boston? Yes. Emma turned to Ryan with eyes that held so much hope it hurt to look at. Really, Daddy? You could live here and see me every day? Ryan's voice was thick. Maybe, baby. We'd have to figure out a lot of details first. But maybe? Yeah, maybe. Emma threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking over the water glasses. That would be the best thing ever. Better than ice cream. Better than my birthday. Ryan held her close, and over her head his eyes met Evelyn's. She saw gratitude there, and fear, and something else she couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe. The fragile possibility that life could be different than the punishment he'd sentenced himself to. The pizza arrived, and they ate, while Emma chattered about all the things she and Ryan could do if he lived in Boston. He could come to her soccer games, help with her science projects, read actual bedtime stories instead of phone stories. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and even Ryan's careful warnings that nothing was decided yet couldn't dampen her excitement. Watching them together, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. For 20 years, she'd told herself that success meant sacrifice, that you couldn't have both empire and intimacy. But sitting in this pizza place with cheap wine and paper tablecloths, watching a father and daughter plan a future that might actually happen, she realized she'd been lying to herself. You could have both. You just had to want them both badly enough to do the work. After dinner, Ryan drove Emma home. Jessica met them at the door, and there was a brief negotiation about bedtime and whether Emma had eaten enough vegetables with her pizza. Then Emma hugged Ryan like she was trying to squeeze all her love into one embrace. Love you, Daddy, all the way to the moon and back. Love you more, baby girl, all the way to the stars and back. That's not possible. I love you most. It was clearly a ritual, worn smooth with repetition. Ryan kissed the top of her head, then watched as Jessica gently pulled Emma inside, waving goodbye one more time before the door closed. The silence in the car afterward was heavy. Ryan sat with his hands on the steering wheel, not moving, not starting the engine. You okay? Evelyn asked. Every time I leave her, it gets harder. Doesn't matter that I'll see her again in a few weeks. Leaving still feels like tearing off a piece of my heart. So don't leave. Take the job. Move to Boston. Be here. It's not that simple. I'd need to find an apartment, figure out a custody schedule with Jessica, actually do all the work of rebuilding my life here, instead of just visiting it. Hard work, not impossible work. Ryan finally started the engine. You make it sound easy. I make it sound possible. There's a difference. Evelyn watched the neighborhood slide past, modest homes with lights in the windows, families settling in for the evening. I spent 20 years choosing easy over possible. Building a company was easy. I just had to work harder than everyone else, be smarter, more ruthless. Building a life was possible, but it required things I wasn't willing to give. Vulnerability, trust, the risk of actually needing someone.
And now? Now I'm sitting in a borrowed Honda Civic in Boston, having spent the day eating ice cream and watching a 7-year-old on a playground, and I can't remember the last time I felt this close to something real. Ryan glanced at her, something complicated in his expression. We barely know each other. We survived a plane crash together. We've seen each other at our most terrified. You told me about Marcus. I told you about my empty empire. That's not barely knowing each other. That's knowing the parts most people spend years hiding. Fair point. Ryan navigated back toward Evelyn's hotel, the evening traffic light. So what happens now? You go back to running your company, I take flying lessons to get current again, and we text occasionally about weather and news coverage? Or, Evelyn said carefully, we actually try. Build something real instead of letting this be just another story about people who almost connected but didn't. Try what exactly? Friendship, partnership. Figuring out what it looks like when two people who've spent years running from themselves decide to stand still long enough to actually face who they are. Ryan pulled into the hotel parking lot but didn't immediately stop. He circled once, then twice, and Evelyn realized he was thinking, processing, trying to decide if he could trust this moment. Finally, he parked and turned to face her. I'm not good at this. At letting people in. After the divorce, after Marcus, I decided it was safer to keep everything surface level. Work relationships, polite friendships, nothing that could actually hurt if it fell apart. Me too, Evelyn admitted. Except I made that decision at 22 and spent the next 20 years perfecting it. You're way ahead of me on the emotional availability scale. Ryan's laugh was surprised and genuine. We're a mess, aren't we? Completely. But maybe that's okay. Maybe two messes can figure out how to be less messy together. Is this really about the job? Or is there something else happening here? The question hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Evelyn could deflect, could retreat into professional boundaries and safe categories, or she could do what terrified her and tell the truth. I don't know yet, she said. I know I want you to work for me because you're brilliant at what you do. I know I want to be in your life because you remind me what actually matters. Whether that becomes friendship or something else, I think we figure that out as we go. That's not very CEO of you. Don't you usually have a strategic plan? Usually. But I'm learning that some things can't be strategically planned. Some things you just have to do and see what happens. Ryan reached across the console and took her hand. His grip was warm, solid, real. Okay. Okay, what? Okay, let's try. I'll take the job, move to Boston, figure out how to be Emma's actual dad instead of her weekend entertainment, and we'll see what else develops along the way. No pressure, Evelyn said quickly. This doesn't have to be, I know, but I'm open to it. Whatever it becomes. Ryan smiled, and it reached his eyes for the first time since she'd met him. You saved something in me yesterday, Evelyn. When you held my phone with that message to Emma, when you looked at me like I mattered, instead of looking through me like I didn't exist, I want to see where that leads. Evelyn felt tears threatening and blinked them back. You saved me too, literally and figuratively. Then we're even. Not even close, but it's a start. They sat in the car for a while longer, holding hands like teenagers, talking about logistics and timing and all the practical details that would turn possibility into reality. Ryan would give his notice at the maintenance job, take time to complete his flight currency requirements, work with Evelyn's team to build an aviation program that actually served its pilots instead of just extracting maximum value from them. And somewhere in all of that, they would figure out what they were to each other beyond survivor and saved, beyond employer and employee, beyond two broken people who had found each other at 37,000 feet and decided not to let go. When Evelyn finally got out of the car, Ryan walked her to the hotel entrance like they were on a first date instead of negotiating employment terms. At the door, he hesitated, then pulled her into a hug that felt like promise and apology and hope all wrapped together. Thank you, he said quietly, for seeing me, for Emma, for all of it. Thank you for landing the plane, Evelyn said into his shoulder, for being brave enough to try again, for letting me be part of this. They pulled apart slowly, and Evelyn watched him drive away, taillights disappearing into Boston traffic. Then she went up to her room and sat by the window, looking out at the city where her life was about to change in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her phone buzzed with the text from Ryan. Emma already asked when you're coming to visit again. Apparently you're now part of her approved list of Daddy's friends. Fair warning, that comes with obligations, birthday parties, school plays, the whole package. Evelyn smiled through tears and typed back, I accept all obligations, especially if they involve ice cream. Another buzz. A photo this time. Emma in her pajamas, holding a drawing she'd made. Stick figures labeled Daddy, Emma, and Evelyn standing in front of what looked like a very crooked airplane. The caption read, She drew this before bed. Says you're part of our story now. Evelyn saved the photo and stared at it for a long time, at the simple crayon figures representing something so much bigger than she'd ever imagined wanting. A family she hadn't earned, a place she didn't deserve, a future she was terrified to reach for. But she was going to anyway, because yesterday she'd almost died and today she'd started learning how to live. And tomorrow she was going to build something that mattered more than profit margins and market share. She was going to build a life. 3 months later, Evelyn stood in the operations hangar at Hanscom Field watching Ryan complete his final check ride. Through the window of the simulator room, she could see him in the left seat, hands moving with practiced precision across controls that had become familiar again through weeks of intensive retraining. The instructor beside him was nodding, making notes on a tablet, and even from this distance, Evelyn could read the body language. Ryan was passing, excelling actually, proving that 7 years away hadn't diminished the fundamental skill that made him extraordinary. He's a natural, said Captain Morrison, the chief instructor Evelyn had hired to run Crosstech's new aviation program. Morrison was retired Air Force, 63 years old with more flight hours than most pilots would accumulate in 3 lifetimes. Best student I've had in years. The fundamentals are so deeply embedded that we're basically just updating his procedural knowledge and getting him current on new systems. When can he start flying for us? Evelyn asked. Technically, as soon as he passes this check ride, but I'd recommend a few supervised flights first. Let him build confidence. It's not the skill I'm worried about. It's the mental game. 7 years is a long time to carry guilt. Evelyn knew that better than anyone. She'd spent the past 3 months watching Ryan navigate his return to flying, seeing him wrestle with doubt and fear every step of the way. Some days he was confident, sharp, the pilot who had landed a 767 with no engines. Other days he was paralyzed by second-guessing, convinced that his next mistake would be the one that killed someone. Those were the days Evelyn had learned to recognize and interrupt. She'd show up at the flight school with coffee, sit with him in companionable silence, remind him without words that he wasn't alone in this, that rebuilding yourself was hard work, but it was work worth doing. The simulator session ended and Ryan emerged looking exhausted but satisfied. He spotted Evelyn through the window and his face transformed, the professional mask dropping to reveal something warmer, more vulnerable. She'd learned to read his expressions over these months, the subtle shifts that indicated what he needed, whether it was space or company, silence or conversation. How'd it go, she asked when he joined her in the hallway. Passed. Morrison says I'm certified to fly anything in the Crosstech fleet. Ryan's smile was cautious, like he didn't quite trust the victory. So I guess I'm officially your chief pilot now. Guess so. Evelyn fought the urge to hug him, aware they were in a professional setting with people watching. Their relationship existed in a strange liminal space. Not quite romance, not exactly friendship, something deeper and more complicated that neither of them had figured out how to name yet. Emma's going to be so excited. She's planned a whole celebration. Jessica texted me the menu. Apparently we're having fancy pasta, which I think means spaghetti with the good parmesan. Over the past 3 months, Evelyn had become a regular fixture in Emma's life. Weekend visits had turned into weeknight dinners, school events, and one memorable Saturday spent building a blanket fort that took over Ryan's entire living room. Emma had accepted Evelyn's presence with the easy adaptability of children, never questioning why Daddy's boss wanted to spend so much time with them, just enjoying having another adult who was willing to play elaborate imaginary games and read the same book 17 times without complaint. Jessica had been more cautious initially, protective of her daughter, and wary of this wealthy CEO who'd appeared suddenly in Ryan's life. But Evelyn had won her over through persistence and genuine interest in Emma's well-being. They'd had coffee together, just the two of them, and Evelyn had been honest about her intentions, not to replace Jessica or disrupt Emma's life, but to support Ryan as he rebuilt his relationship with his daughter. "I'm not trying to be her mother," Evelyn had said during that conversation. "I'm just trying to be present, to show up. I've spent 20 years not showing up for anyone, and I'm learning that actually being there is harder and more important than anything I've ever built." Jessica had studied her with the same clear-eyed assessment Emma sometimes showed, then nodded. "Okay, but if you hurt either of them, CEO or not, I will make your life very difficult." "Fair enough," Evelyn had agreed and meant it. Now, walking out of the hangar with Ryan, Evelyn felt the weight of the past 3 months settling into something that felt almost like contentment. Her board had been initially skeptical of her decision to build an internal aviation program, questioning the expense and distraction from core business. But Evelyn had presented it as a strategic investment in executive efficiency, and the numbers supported her case. What she hadn't told them was that the real investment was in proving to herself that business success and human decency weren't mutually exclusive. "You hungry?" Ryan asked as they reached their cars. His a sensible sedan he'd bought when he moved to Boston. Hers the same luxury vehicle she'd been driving for years, but now felt slightly embarrassed by. "We've got 2 hours before we're due at my place for the celebration." "Starving, actually." They found a diner near the airport, the kind of place with vinyl booths and coffee that came in endless refills. Ryan ordered a burger, Evelyn got a salad she knew she wouldn't finish, and they sat across from each other in comfortable silence while the lunch crowd buzzed around them. "I saw Marcus's wife last week," Ryan said suddenly. "Diane. She's in Boston visiting her sister, so we met for coffee." Evelyn set down her fork. "How was that?" "Hard. Good. Both." Ryan stared at his burger without eating. "I told her about the landing, about everything that's happened since, about you, about Emma, about coming back to flying." "What did she say?" "She cried, but not sad crying. Relief, I think. She said she's been worried about me for 7 years, wondering if I'd ever forgive myself. Wondering if Marcus's death was going to define the rest of my life." "And now?" Ryan met her eyes, and Evelyn saw something in his expression that hadn't been there 3 months ago. Peace, maybe, or the beginning of it. "Now I think maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe what happened to Marcus can be part of my story without being the whole story." He picked up his burger, then set it down again. "She told me something I didn't know. After Marcus died, she found a letter he'd written to his daughters to be opened if he didn't come home from deployment. One of the things he wrote was that if something happened to him, he hoped his wingman, me, wouldn't blame himself, that we were both doing our jobs, both making impossible choices, and that he trusted my judgment completely." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "You've been carrying guilt he didn't want you to have." "Yeah." Diane said she should have shown me the letter years ago, but she was dealing with her own grief and didn't think about it until recently. But reading his words, Ryan's voice cracked slightly. "He forgave me before I even had anything to forgive, and I've spent 7 years punishing myself for a choice he understood and accepted. That must have been overwhelming." It was, but also freeing. Ryan finally took a bite of his burger, chewed thoughtfully. Diane said something else too. She said the best way to honor Marcus wasn't to stop flying, but to fly better, to carry his memory into every cockpit, every decision, every flight, to let what I learned from losing him make me a better pilot, not a grounded one. She's right. I know, and I think I'm finally ready to believe it. Ryan reached across the table and took Evelyn's hand, a gesture that had become natural over the past months. "Thank you for being patient with me, for not pushing, but also not letting me hide." "You did the same for me," Evelyn said. "You showed me what it looks like to actually care about something beyond quarterly earnings, to measure success in Emma's laughter instead of stock prices. You've changed, you know, since that day on the plane." "So have you." Ryan smiled. "We're both works in progress, I guess." They finished lunch talking about logistics. Ryan's first official flight for Crosstech was scheduled for next week, a simple run to New York with 2 executives who needed to be at a merger negotiation. Morrison would fly with him as a supervisor, ensuring everything went smoothly. Then, if all went well, Ryan would start flying solo, building up the program Evelyn had designed specifically around his needs and Emma's schedule. The dinner celebration at Ryan's apartment that evening was exactly what Emma had promised. Fancy pasta that was indeed spaghetti with expensive parmesan, garlic bread that Jessica had contributed, and a cake from Emma's favorite bakery that read Captain Daddy in blue frosting. Emma wore a dress she'd picked out specifically for the occasion and had made Ryan wear his new pilot uniform, which he'd tried to refuse but couldn't resist his daughter's pleading. "You look so official, Daddy," Emma said, examining his captain's bars with reverence. "Like a real pilot." "I am a real pilot, baby." "I know, but now you look like it too." Jessica took pictures, her phone capturing moments that would become part of Emma's memory. Daddy in his uniform, Evelyn laughing at something Emma said, all of them crowded around Ryan's small dining table in the apartment he'd rented 3 blocks from Jessica's place. It wasn't much, a 1-bedroom with furniture from IKEA and walls that needed painting, but it was his. A home instead of a hotel, a life instead of a layover. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Evelyn her room at Daddy's house, the 2nd bedroom that Ryan had converted into a space just for her, with a bed shaped like a racing car and walls painted purple at her request. She had books here, toys here, drawings she'd made displayed with magnetic clips on a board Ryan had mounted at her height. "This is where I stay when it's Daddy's days," Emma explained, showing Evelyn each treasure. "I have my own toothbrush in the bathroom and everything, and Daddy reads me stories every night, not just on the phone." "That's wonderful, sweetie." "Are you going to marry my daddy?" The question came out of nowhere, delivered with 7-year-old directness. Evelyn froze, completely unprepared. "Emma, we're not, your dad and I are friends." "But you love him, I can tell." Evelyn sat on the edge of the racing car bed, meeting Emma's serious gaze. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Your dad and I care about each other very much, but we're still figuring out what that means. Mommy says you're good for him, that you make him smile more. He makes me smile more, too." Emma climbed onto the bed beside her, leaning against Evelyn with the unconscious affection of a child who'd decided someone was safe. "I'm glad you were on that plane. Even though it was scary, if you weren't there, you and Daddy wouldn't have met." "That's true. So maybe scary things can turn into good things, if you're brave enough." The wisdom of 7-year-olds, Evelyn thought, delivered without awareness of how profound it was. She put her arm around Emma, and they sat there quietly, hearing the murmur of adult conversation from the living room. Ryan and Jessica discussing custody schedules, logistics, the mundane coordination of co-parenting that was actually the foundation of Emma's stability. "I think your daddy's very brave," Evelyn said, "and I think you're brave too." "Because I wasn't scared on the plane?" "Because you love so openly. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." Later, after Emma had been tucked into bed with the elaborate ritual that apparently involved 3 specific stuffed animals and a glass of water at exactly the right temperature, the adults sat in Ryan's living room with coffee and the exhaustion that comes from entertaining a 7-year-old's boundless energy. "She asked Evelyn if they were getting married," Jessica said casually, and Ryan nearly choked on his coffee. "She what?" "Relax, I heard it through the door. Emma's not exactly subtle." Jessica looked at Evelyn with amusement. "What did you tell her?" "That we're figuring it out," Evelyn said honestly. "Good answer. Honest without being too complicated for her to process." Jessica stood, collecting her bag. "I should go. Early shift tomorrow. Ryan, you've got her through Wednesday, right?" "Yeah, I'll drop her at school Wednesday morning." After Jessica left, the apartment felt suddenly quiet and intimate. Ryan and Evelyn sat on opposite ends of his couch, the space between them full of things neither had quite figured out how to say. "Sorry about Emma's question," Ryan said finally. "She's at that age where she thinks every adult relationship should end in marriage." "It's okay. It's not like I haven't thought about it." Ryan turned to look at her fully. "You have. Of course I have. I spend more time with you and Emma than anyone else. I've rearranged my entire schedule around your training flights. I'm having dinner with your ex-wife and celebrating your career milestones like they're my own. If that's not the foundation of something serious, I don't know what is." "But?" Ryan prompted, hearing the hesitation. "But I'm terrified," Evelyn admitted. "I've never done this before. Never let myself want something I couldn't control or achieve through sheer force of will. You can't strategize your way into love. You just have to fall and trust that someone will catch you. And you don't trust easily. Neither do you. Ryan smiled at the truth of it. We're quite a pair, both of us damaged in our own ways, both trying to rebuild ourselves into people who can actually connect with other humans. Is it working? Evelyn asked. The rebuilding? I think so. 3 months ago, I couldn't imagine flying again. Now I'm starting a new job doing what I love. 3 months ago, I saw Emma on weekends and felt like an outsider in her life. Now I'm here for school pickups and bedtime stories and all the mundane, beautiful moments that make up actual parenting. And 3 months ago, you met a judgmental CEO who dismissed you as beneath her. And now that CEO is sitting on my couch, having spent the evening celebrating with my daughter, looking at me like maybe I'm worth keeping around. Evelyn moved closer, closing the space between them. You're definitely worth keeping around. Even though I come with trauma and a complicated custody arrangement and a 7-year-old who asks inappropriate questions? Especially because of all that. The trauma means you understand pain. The custody arrangement means you prioritize what matters. And Emma, Evelyn's voice softened. Emma reminds me why any of this is worth doing. Ryan reached up and touched her face, his calloused fingers gentle. I'm falling in love with you. I think I have been since you held my phone on that plane and looked at me like I mattered. But I need you to know that Emma comes first, always. If that's something you can't accept, stop, Evelyn interrupted. Emma should come first. The fact that you put her first is one of the things I love about you. I'm not asking to compete with your daughter. I'm asking to be part of both your lives. Both our lives, Ryan repeated, testing the words. That's a big ask. I know. But I'm learning to ask for big things instead of settling for safe things. They kissed then, finally, 3 months of growing closeness, finding its natural expression. It was gentle and tentative and perfect, the kiss of two people who'd been broken and were learning to be whole together. When they pulled apart, Ryan was smiling. That was worth the wait. Definitely worth the wait. So what happens now? Ryan asked. We date? Tell Emma we're together? Navigate the complexity of you being my boss and also my... What are you exactly? I don't know. Partner? Girlfriend? Those words feel too small for what this is. Agreed. But we should probably figure out something before Emma decides to announce to her entire second-grade class that her daddy and Evelyn are kissing now. Evelyn laughed, imagining Emma's enthusiastic revelation. How about we take it one day at a time? Keep showing up for each other, keep being honest, and see where it leads. That's still not very CEO of you. No strategic plan? I'm learning that the best things in life don't follow strategic plans. They just unfold if you're brave enough to let them. Ryan pulled her closer, and they sat like that for a long time, talking quietly about the future they were building together. He told her about the flights he was nervous about, the moments when he still doubted himself, the nightmares where he was back in that cockpit over Afghanistan watching Marcus go down. She told him about the board meeting where she'd fought to redirect company resources toward employee wellness instead of pure profit maximization, about the relationships she was trying to rebuild with the people she'd trampled on her way to the top, about learning that being vulnerable wasn't weakness, but courage. It was past midnight when Evelyn finally left, Ryan walking her to her car like he always did, stealing one more kiss in the parking lot like teenagers. Text me when you get home, he said. I always do. I know, but I like knowing you're safe. Driving back to her penthouse apartment, the one she was increasingly thinking about giving up for something smaller, warmer, closer to Ryan and Emma, Evelyn thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. From dismissing a stranger on a plane to falling in love with him, from measuring success in billions to measuring it in bedtime stories and celebration dinners. She had almost died on Flight 1847. But the real miracle wasn't the landing, it was what came after. The slow, difficult work of becoming someone worth saving, the courage to let people in. The recognition that empire meant nothing without connection. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. A photo of Emma asleep in her racing car bed, Captain Bear, the stuffed animal she'd named after her father's new job, clutched in her arms. The message read, "She wanted to make sure you knew you're always welcome here. Also, she's already planning your next visit. Fair warning, it involves teaching you to play her Princess Dragon space station game. Evelyn saved the photo and typed back. I accept all obligations, especially the weird ones. Another buzz. You're good at this, at being part of our lives. I'm learning. You're a patient teacher. We're learning together. That's the point. Evelyn pulled into her parking garage, but instead of going inside immediately, she sat in her car looking at the exchange. This was what she'd been missing for 20 years. Not just romance or family, but genuine connection with people who saw her completely and chose her anyway. Who challenged her to be better while accepting who she was right now. The next week, Ryan's first official flight for Crosstech went perfectly. Morrison reported that Ryan flew with confidence and precision, handling the executives with professionalism while maintaining complete focus on safety. The passengers had no idea their pilot was the same man from the Copper Ridge Miracle, and Ryan preferred it that way. He wanted to build his reputation on consistent competence, not one dramatic landing. Evelyn flew with him for the first time 2 weeks later, a trip to San Francisco for a meeting she could have video conferenced but chose to take in person because it meant time with Ryan. She sat in the passenger cabin watching him in the cockpit, seeing the man who belonged in that seat, and felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with business achievement. After landing, Ryan found her in the cabin. How was your flight, Ms. Cross? Perfect, Captain Hale. The pilot showed exceptional skill and judgment. His smile was warm and private. The pilot was motivated by having someone he cares about on board. Good motivator. They had 24 hours in San Francisco before the return flight, and they spent it like tourists, walking across the Golden Gate Bridge, eating at a seafood place on the wharf, talking about everything and nothing. Ryan told her about his plans to take Emma to visit colleges someday, even though she was only 7. Evelyn told him about the foundation she was starting, using Crosstech profits to fund programs for children of single parents, scholarships and childcare assistance, and all the support Ryan had needed but never had when he was navigating custody and career. You're doing this because of Emma? Ryan asked. I'm doing it because I can. Because I have resources that can actually change lives. And I spent 20 years using those resources just to accumulate more resources. That was waste. This is purpose. Marcus would have liked you, Ryan said suddenly. He always said the best pilots were the ones who understood that technical skill meant nothing without moral clarity. You're learning moral clarity. I had a good teacher. I'm serious. You're becoming the kind of person who makes the world better just by being in it. That's rare. Evelyn leaned against him, watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of gold and orange. I'm becoming the person I should have been all along. I just needed someone to show me it was possible. 6 months after the landing, the NTSB released its final report on Flight 1847. The investigation had determined that fuel contamination from a faulty ground service vehicle had led to both engines failing simultaneously, a 1 in a million occurrence that should have ended in catastrophic loss of life. Instead, through a combination of extraordinary skill, perfect conditions, and what one investigator called the most impressive display of airmanship I've encountered in 30 years, Captain Ryan Hale had saved everyone on board. The report recommended Ryan for commendation and suggested his techniques be studied for training purposes. The media coverage reignited briefly, but Ryan declined most interview requests, giving one carefully crafted statement that honored Marcus and emphasized the importance of pilot training and safety protocols. Evelyn stood beside him at the press conference, not as his boss but as his partner, a relationship they'd finally acknowledged publicly after Emma had indeed told her entire second-grade class that Evelyn was basically going to be my bonus mom. The teacher had called Jessica to clarify. Jessica had laughed and said Emma wasn't entirely wrong, and somehow the secret was out without anyone officially announcing it. After the press conference, they drove to the small cemetery outside Boston where Marcus Chen was buried. Ryan hadn't visited in 7 years, couldn't face it, but now he stood at the grave with Evelyn beside him and Emma's hand in his, ready to finally say goodbye. I'm sorry I left you, Ryan said quietly, speaking to the headstone. I'm sorry I chose the mission over my wingman. I've carried that guilt every day since, let it define me. Used it as an excuse to walk away from everything I loved. Emma squeezed his hand, her 7-year-old understanding incomplete, but her support absolute. But I think I'm finally ready to forgive myself, Ryan continued, to let your death be part of my story without being the end of it. Diane showed me your letter, and I understand now that you wouldn't want me to stop flying, to stop living. You'd want me to honor your memory by being the best version of myself. He paused, gathering himself. So that's what I'm doing. Flying again, being Emma's real father, building a life with someone who makes me want to be better. And every time I'm in a cockpit, every time I make a decision that keeps people safe, I'm carrying you with me. Not as guilt, but as inspiration. Evelyn watched tears stream down Ryan's face as he finally released 7 years of self-imposed punishment. Emma hugged her father's leg, and Evelyn put her arm around both of them, this small family that had formed from tragedy and choice, and the courage to try again. We should go, Ryan said finally. Emma's got soccer practice. As they walked back to the car, Emma skipped ahead, her resilience and joy undiminished by the heavy moment she'd just witnessed. Ryan took Evelyn's hand and she felt the change in him, not healed completely because some wounds never fully close, but healing, moving forward instead of staying frozen. Thank you for being here, he said. Always, Evelyn promised. That evening, in Ryan's apartment with Emma finally asleep after an elaborate bedtime negotiation, Ryan and Evelyn sat on the couch talking about the future they were building. Crosstech's aviation program was expanding, with Ryan training new pilots and implementing safety protocols that prioritized human welfare over efficiency. Evelyn's foundation had awarded its first round of scholarships, helping 20 single parents afford childcare while pursuing career advancement. And somewhere in the middle of rebuilding their professional lives, they'd built something personal, messy, and complicated and real. Move in with me, Ryan said suddenly. Evelyn looked at him in surprise. We've only been officially together for 3 months. I know, but you're here almost every night anyway. Emma asks for you when you're not here, and I wake up every morning wishing you were beside me instead of across town in that sterile penthouse. It's not sterile. It's a hotel room that costs more than most people's annual salary. You hate it there. Evelyn couldn't argue because he was right. She did hate it, had hated it for years but never admitted it to herself. What about Emma? She asked. This is her space with you. I don't want to intrude on that. You're not intruding, you're expanding it, making it fuller, richer. Emma already considers you part of the family. She introduced you to her teacher as Daddy's Evelyn yesterday. Daddy's Evelyn, she repeated, trying out the phrase. I like that better than CEO. So that's a yes? That's a terrified yes. A yes that comes with the caveat that I've never lived with anyone before, never shared space, or compromised on furniture arrangements, or figured out whose responsibility it is to buy groceries. We'll figure it out together, Ryan said, same way we've figured out everything else. By stumbling through it and hoping for the best? Exactly, with maybe slightly better planning than that implies. Evelyn laughed and kissed him, this man who had saved her life and then taught her how to actually live it. Okay, let's do it. Let's build a home together. The moving process took 2 weeks, and Evelyn discovered that 20 years of accumulating possessions meant she had almost nothing worth keeping. Designer furniture that had never been sat on, art she'd bought as investment rather than because she liked it, kitchen equipment she'd never learned to use. It all went to charity or auction. What she kept fit in a few boxes: books she actually read, photographs from the trip to San Francisco with Ryan, the drawing Emma had made of them as a family. Ryan's apartment was too small for all of them long-term, so they started house hunting together, looking for something with space for Emma's elaborate games and Ryan's growing collection of aviation history books and Evelyn's home office. They found it in a neighborhood halfway between Emma's school and the airport, a 3-bedroom house with a yard and a porch and absolutely no pretension to luxury. It's perfect, Evelyn said, standing in the empty living room and imagining it full of life. It needs work, Ryan pointed out. The kitchen's outdated. The bathrooms need remodeling. We'll fix it together, make it ours. They moved in on a Saturday, with Jessica and Emma helping and a team of movers handling the heavy furniture. By evening, the house was chaos. Boxes everywhere, furniture in wrong rooms, Emma helping by unpacking things and putting them in creative locations. I found a home for Captain Bear, Emma announced, placing the stuffed animal on the mantel like a trophy. "He can watch over our whole house from here." "Perfect spot," Ryan agreed. That night, after Emma had been tucked into her new room with its view of the backyard and promises that Daddy and Evelyn would paint it any color she wanted, Ryan and Evelyn collapsed on the couch in their new living room, exhausted and happy. "We did it," Evelyn said. "We built something real." "We're still building," Ryan corrected. "This is just the foundation." "Good foundation, though." "The best." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the house settle around them, the small creaks and sighs of a space becoming a home. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, families settling in for the night, the ordinary rhythm of ordinary lives. And for the first time in 20 years, Evelyn was grateful to be ordinary, to have a house instead of a penthouse, a family instead of an empire, love instead of achievement. The crash had almost killed her, but it had also cracked her open, let light into places she'd kept dark for decades, shown her that the person she'd built herself into wasn't the person she wanted to be. Ryan had saved more than 300 lives that day, but he'd also saved his own, found his way back to the sky and to himself, learned that guilt was a choice and forgiveness was possible. And together, impossibly, they'd saved each other. Not through grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but through the daily choice to show up, be honest, and try. Through bedtime stories and pilot training and foundation building and learning to measure success in laughter instead of profits. Emma appeared in her pajamas, Captain Bear under her arm. "I can't sleep. The house sounds different." Ryan pulled her onto his lap. "New houses always sound different at first, but it'll become familiar." "Can Evelyn tell me a story?" Both of them looked at Evelyn with expectation, and she felt a flutter of panic. She'd never told bedtime stories, didn't know the rhythm or the rules. "I don't know any good stories," she admitted. "Yes, you do," Emma insisted. "Tell me about the plane, about how you and Daddy met and how he saved everyone and how you became a family." Evelyn looked at Ryan, who nodded encouragement. So she began, telling the story of a plane that fell from the sky and a man who brought it home, of a CEO who learned what mattered, and a father who found his way back to flying. She told it simply, editing out the terror and trauma, focusing instead on the courage and the hope and the impossible grace of survival. Emma listened with rapt attention, her eyes growing heavy as the story wound toward its conclusion. "And then what happened?" Emma asked, fighting sleep. "Then we became a family," Evelyn said softly. "We learned to be brave together. We built a home. We loved each other enough to try." "That's the best story," Emma murmured, her eyes closing. "Better than Frozen." Ryan carried his daughter back to bed, and Evelyn stayed on the couch, looking around at the boxes and furniture and chaos that represented their new life together. She heard Ryan's voice through Emma's door, the murmur of final goodnights and promises that everything would be okay. When he returned, he pulled Evelyn to her feet and into his arms. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being on that plane, for giving me your number, for being patient while I figured out how to fly again, for loving my daughter, for building this with me." "Thank you for saving my life," Evelyn countered, "for showing me what actually matters, for teaching me that it's never too late to become who you're supposed to be." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in their new home, two broken people who'd found their way to wholeness through each other. Outside, the world continued turning, planes taking off and landing at Hanscom Field, the city lights of Boston glowing against the night sky. And somewhere up there, higher than planes flew, the stars watched over a family that had been forged at 37,000 feet and had chosen, against all odds, to keep flying. Not away from fear or toward escape, but together on purpose, building something that mattered more than any miracle. Building a life worth living, building home.